Hi guys, tonight we're following the complete history of coffee, the dark little drink that slipped from mountain forests into monasteries, ports, palaces, coffee houses, revolutions, factories, offices, and somehow, probably, your kitchen. Imagine this mist clings to green Ethiopian hills. Red coffee cherries shine like tiny lanterns among glossy leaves, and somewhere nearby, a goat is having the most dramatic evening of its life. Why did humans ever decide to roast, grind, boil, trade, bun, smuggle, worship, and argue over one bitter seed? And how did a drink that began in wild highland shrubs become the fuel for poets, rebels, merchants, soldiers, and exhausted people pretending they are morning persons? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what your local time is right now. It is always oddly comforting to imagine all these sleepy little lights around the world. Now, dim the lights. You stand in the highlands of Ethiopia, where the air is cool enough to touch your cheeks like damp linen. The hills roll gently around you, blue and green beneath a pale sky, their slopes threaded with paths worn by bare feet, hooves, and rain. Somewhere in the distance, cattle bells clink softly. Birds call through the trees. The smell is rich and living, wet leaves, dark soil, wood smoke from a village hearth, and the faint sweetness of ripening fruit. You are not yet holding a cup of coffee. No one here is. Not in the way you know it. There is no porcelain mug warming your hands, no sleepy kitchen counter, no cafe window fogged by winter breath. There are only shrubs, shining leaves, and clusters of red cherries growing in the shade. Inside each cherry rest two pale seeds, pressed together like small secrets. The mainstream history is clear in one important sense. Coffee's botanical home lies in the forests of Ethiopia, especially the southwestern highlands, where wild Coffea arabica grew long before it became a global crop. The exact human beginning is Mystia, which is very appropriate, because coffee seems to enjoy arriving through fog. People in this region likely knew the plant in practical ways before anyone thought to brew it as a drink. The cherries could be chewed. The seeds and pulp could be mixed with fat into small energy balls. Leaves may have been steeped. It was useful, lively, and local, long before it became fashionable enough for people to discuss notes of jasmine with a straight face. And then, of course, there is Kaldi. You can almost see him on a slope at dusk, a young goat herd watching his animals with the exhausted patience of someone who has spent all day negotiating with goats, which is rarely a dignified profession. The story says his goats nibble red berries from a wild shrub and become unusually energetic. They leap, dance, refuse sleep, and behave like tiny horned philosophers who have just discovered a dangerous idea. Kaldi, curious, or simply desperate to understand why his herd has turned into a hillside festival, tastes the fruit himself. A warmth travels through him, his tiredness thins. The evening seems brighter, the bells sound sharper, the air feels more awake. It is a wonderful tale, and possibly much too neat. Historians still argue whether Kaldi existed at all, or whether he is a later invention, a charming little origin story created to explain a plant whose real discovery was slower, messier, and shared by many unnamed people. That is usually how history works. One famous goat gets the applause, while generations of farmers, gatherers, traders, and cooks do the actual work. Very rude of the goat, honestly. Still, the legend matters because it tells you how people imagined coffee not as a luxury at first, but as a force of wakefulness. Coffee enters memory as motion, jumping goats, bright eyes, sleeplessness, a body refusing to sink into ordinary fatigue. You walk closer to the coffee shrub. Its leaves are smooth beneath your fingers, waxy and cool from the mist. The cherries are firm, with a skin that gives slightly when pressed. If you split one open, the pulp smells faintly sweet, almost floral, nothing like the roasted bitterness waiting in coffee's future. The seed inside is pale and hard. It does not yet smell like morning. It smells like a forest secret that has not learned to speak. Nearby, a small settlement settles into evening. Smoke rises in soft grey ribbons. Someone pounds grain with a steady wooden rhythm. Children's voices fade as darkness gathers. The world is not quiet. Exactly. It breathes. Insects hum. Leaves drip. A dog barks once, then thinks better of it. The atmosphere is calm but not empty. It is the kind of calm where something can begin without announcing itself. A quirky old tidbit lingers here in some Ethiopian traditions. Coffee was not only drunk but eaten, especially when ground or crushed with animal fat into portable food. Imagine history's first energy snack, earthy, chewy, and absolutely not wrapped in shiny branding. You can almost picture a traveller tucking it away for a long path through the hills, not seeking elegance, only endurance. Coffee begins not as a lifestyle, but as help. And help is never a small thing. You feel that truth in the highland air. People live by weather, harvest, animals, memory, and muscle. A plant that sharpens the senses has value. A berry that helps a tired body continue is not merely interesting, it is practical, perhaps even precious. The future coffeehouse debates, the revolutions, the shipping fortunes, the office break rooms with suspicious carpet stains. All of that is still hidden inside these quiet seeds. For now, coffee belongs to the land. The plant grows under forest canopy, protected from harsh sun. Its roots grip the soil. Its cherries ripen slowly. There is no empire here yet, no plantation ledger, no café bill, no scholar over-caffeinated enough to write 12 pages on the moral dangers of public conversation. There is only a highland shrub and human curiosity. You sit near a small fire as night folds over the hills. The heat touches your shins. The smoke carries a woody scent into your clothes. Someone may roast seeds in a pan, not yet with the precise ritual that later centuries will adore, but with experiment, accident, patience. The seeds darken. Their smell changes. Something grassy turns deeper. Something hidden opens. A bitter fragrance rises, warm and strange, and the air seems to lean toward it. That is coffee's first quiet magic transformation. Fruit becomes seed. Seed becomes roast. Roast becomes drink. Drink becomes habit. Habit becomes meeting place. Meeting place becomes argument. Argument becomes movement. And movement, sometimes, becomes revolution. But here, you do not rush. You listen to the night insects. You feel the ground cool beneath you. You watch sparks lift into the dark like tiny red cherries returning to the sky. The first bitter sip has not conquered anything. It simply waits in the hands of people who are tired, curious, and awake. You climb through the dark folds of Yemen's mountains, where the night air feels thin, cool, and almost silver against your skin. The paths are narrow, cut into slopes that rise sharply above valleys shadowed by stone villages and terraced fields. Moonlight rests on the edges of walls. A donkey shifts its weight beside a gate. Somewhere far below, water moves through an irrigation channel with a sound like quiet breathing. Here, coffee begins to change from a useful plant into a ritual. You enter a world of mountain settlements and Sufi lodges, where devotion often stretches deep into the night. The lamps are small, their flames tremble in clay niches. The smell of wool, dust, sweat, old wood, and warmed spices hangs in the room. Men sit close together on mats, their robes brushing softly as they shift. A low chant rises, fades, and rises again. Not loud, not theatrical, but steady enough to pull the mind away from ordinary thoughts. You are offered a dark drink in a small vessel. It is not sweet. It does not flatter you. It is bitter, earthy, and hot enough to make your fingers careful. You sip, and the taste spreads slowly across your tongue, sharp at first, then deep, then strangely clean. Your eyelids, which had been making rather persuasive arguments for sleep, begin to lose the debate. Coffee, in this setting, becomes a companion to wakefulness. In Yemen, especially from the 15th century onward, Sufi communities are strongly associated with the early use of coffee as a brewed beverage. They drank it to help them remain alert during long hours of prayer, remembrance, and chanting. This is one of the most important mainstream facts in coffee's history. The drink's rise is closely tied to religious practice, not merely trade or pleasure. Before coffee became the darling of merchants and gossipers, it helped keep tired worshippers upright. A noble beginning, though perhaps also the origin of humanity's long tradition of saying, "Just one more cup and I can continue." You sit among the worshippers as the chant settles into your bones. The floor is firm beneath your ankles. The mat scratches lightly against your palms. Outside, wind presses against the building and slips through cracks with a faint whistle. Inside, the coffee pot is passed with quiet attention. The drink is called kwahwa, a word with older associations that may once have referred to wine or other beverages before coffee claimed it so completely that it practically moved in and rearranged the furniture. That word carries a curious little shadow. One quirky tidbit says that some early listeners were uneasy because kawa sounded linked to appetite suppression or wine, depending on interpretation and context. So this humble cup already came with semantic baggage. Imagine trying to enjoy your late-night devotional beverage while someone in the corner worries that the vocabulary itself looks suspicious. History, as always, finds paperwork even in the steam. The Sufi setting matters because coffee does something tea and wine do not quite do. Wine softens the edges of the world. Coffee sharpens them. It does not pull the body into sleep or loosen the tongue in the same way as alcohol. It steadies attention, brightens fatigue, and lets a group remain awake together. There is intimacy in that shared alertness. You notice the same lifted faces, the same tired smiles, the same hands closing around warmth. Everyone is still human, of course. Someone coughs. Someone's knee cracks loudly during a change of posture. Spiritual discipline is beautiful, but joints remain deeply unimpressed. A roasted smell drifts from a corner where beans are heated over a small fire. The scent is darker than the mountain air outside, with hints of smoke, bread crust, and something almost sweet. A man stirs the beans in a pan, listening for their crackle. The sound is small, like dry twigs breaking. Then the beans are crushed, perhaps with a mortar, the rhythm dull and steady. Water simmers, the grounds bloom, the drink thickens. Each step feels practical, but also ceremonial, as if the preparation itself helps guide the mind toward attention. Historians continue to debate the exact path by which coffee drinking developed in Yemen. Some argue for a gradual adoption from Ethiopian practices, shaped by Red Sea movement and local experimentation. Others emphasize Yemeni religious communities as the first to create the recognizable brewed coffee culture. The evidence is scattered, and the earliest written references are not as generous as sleepy history lovers might wish. Coffee leaves footprints, yes, but not always in a straight line. It is a little like trying to track a cat through incense smoke. You feel the uncertainty in the room. No one here is thinking, this will become a global commodity. They are thinking about staying awake, repeating sacred words, managing the body, warming the hands, and perhaps enjoying the tiny pleasure of bitterness after long discipline. The drink is not yet ordinary. It has an edge of novelty, maybe even risk, but it fits the needs of the night so well that it begins to root itself in habit. The mountains help protect this habit. Yemen's highland climate suits coffee cultivation in particular regions, and terraced agriculture allows careful growing on steep land. Stone walls hold the soil in place. The terraces step across the hills like a patient staircase made by generations. In daylight, you would see coffee shrubs among other crops, their leaves polished by sun, their cherries ripening quietly. At night, you sense them only as a presence beyond the walls, a plant becoming devotion, devotion becoming trade, trade becoming something far harder to contain. The chant grows slower, the cups empty. A lamp burns low, its oil scent mingling with roasted bitterness. Your body is tired, but your mind remains gently lit. Not restless, not frantic, just awake enough to listen. That is the mood coffee. First the masters hear not the harsh buzz of panic, but the soft alertness of people trying to meet the deep hours without surrendering to them. You step outside before dawn. The sky has barely begun to pale. The stones are cold under your feet. From the valley, the first sounds of morning rise, a rooster, a door opening, a vessel set down. The mountains hold their silence a little longer. Behind you, in the lodge, the last murmurs of prayer fade into the blue air, and the smell of coffee clings to your sleeve like a secret kept warm. You descend toward the Red Sea coast, where the mountains loosen their grip and the air grows warmer against your face. The cool stone paths of the highlands give way to dusty roads, lowland heat, and the slow shimmer of water beyond the port. The town of Mocha waits near the shore, bright with sun, salt, and movement. Its name will one day cling to chocolate-coloured drinks and café menus, which is charming, if slightly misleading. Here, Mocha is not dessert. It is a harbour, a threshold, a guarded mouth through which coffee begins to speak to the wider world. You walk into the port at morning, when the light lies flat across the sea. Wooden boats creak against their ropes. Sailcloth snaps softly in the wind. Men shout prices, greetings, warnings, and complaints. Because every port in history is apparently required to sound like three arguments happening at once. The smell is thick and layered salt water, fish, tar, sweat, camel leather, spices, smoke, and somewhere beneath it all, sacks of dried coffee beans with their faint dusty perfume. Mocha becomes one of the first great coffee ports of the world. By the 16th and 17th centuries, Yemeni coffee is moving through Red Sea and Indian Ocean trade networks, reaching Egypt, the Ottoman lands, Persia, India, and eventually Europe. The port's reputation grows because coffee grown in Yemen's highlands is carried down to be exported from here. The drink that helped keep worshippers awake now enters the hands of merchants, ship captains, brokers, tax collectors, and all the other people who can turn a habit into a business with impressive speed. You stand beside a warehouse where workers lift heavy sacks from a line of pack animals. The sacks are rough beneath your palm, woven from coarse fibre, warm from the sun, and dusted with the smell of earth and dried fruit. Inside are beans that have already travelled from terraced farms, through villages and mountain routes, down to this crowded edge of the sea. Each sack contains weather, labour, prayer, bargaining, and patience. It also contains profit, which tends to make everyone suddenly very attentive. The harbour is alive with languages. Arabic moves through the air in quick exchanges. You hear words from traders who have come across the water or along caravan routes. Coins click, wooden scales tilt. A clerk bends over records with a reed pen, looking deeply serious, as clerks often do when they know civilization depends on their columns adding up correctly. Coffee is counted, taxed, inspected, stored, and loaded. Its journey is becoming official. One mainstream historical fact sits firmly here: Yemen guarded its coffee trade closely for a long time. Exported beans were commonly treated so they could not easily sprout, helping protect the region's hold on cultivation. Roasting, boiling, or drying methods reduced the chance that living seeds would be planted elsewhere. This did not make smuggling impossible, because humans are wonderfully persistent when money and desire are involved, but it did make the living coffee plant more difficult to steal. A quirky tidbit follows naturally. Some stories claim that early traders deliberately parboiled or scorched beans before shipping them, as if each little seed had to be politely ruined for agriculture before it could be allowed to leave. Imagine a merchant squinting at a bean and thinking, "You may travel, but you shall not reproduce." It is a very dramatic attitude toward breakfast, and yet it shows how valuable the plant had become. You step closer to the water. The sea glitters too brightly to look at for long. A ship rocks in the harbour, its hull dark and tarred, its deck crowded with cargo. Coffee will leave this coast in the company of spices, textiles, incense, and rumours. It will pass through Muslim trading worlds first, then reach European curiosity through merchants who are always alert to anything rare, profitable, and slightly mysterious. Coffee's taste is bitter, but its reputation is sweetened by distance. The farther it travels, the more exotic it becomes. Still, not everything is certain. Scholars debate how early Mocha dominated the coffee trade compared with other Red Sea ports, and how quickly coffee exports expanded during the first generations of international demand. Records survive unevenly, and commercial life often leaves traces that are practical rather than poetic. A tax document may tell you that goods moved, but not how the dock smelled at noon, or how tired a porter felt carrying a sack down a gangplank. History gives numbers, then makes you imagine the sweat. The atmosphere presses close. Heat rises from the ground through the soles of your feet. Your shirt clings slightly at the back. Flies gather where fish are cleaned near the shore. A vendor pours a small cup of coffee from a long-spouted pot, and the dark liquid flashes in the sun before settling. You take it carefully. It is stronger than you expect. Bitter and warm, with a flavour that seems to contain both mountain shade and coastal dust. The cup is small, but the world inside it has widened. Mocha's importance also gives coffee a kind of passport. Goods do not travel alone. They carry stories, practices, tools, and habits. Along with the beans come ways of roasting, grinding, boiling, serving, and gathering. A merchant who tastes coffee in one port may ask for it in another. A traveller may describe its alerting power. A scholar may praise it. A suspicious official may complain about it. Which, naturally, only makes people more interested. Nothing advertises a drink quite like anxious authority. You wander through a market street where shade cloths ripple above narrow lanes. The air smells of cardamom, sweat, sun-warmed rope, and coffee dust. A cat slips between baskets with the confidence of someone who has never paid rent. Men sit close together in the shade, cups in hand, speaking in low voices about ships, prices, weather, politics, and perhaps someone's cousin who owes someone else money. Coffee is already becoming social glue. It gathers talk around itself. By evening, the harbour softens. The fierce light turns amber. The cries of merchants thin into murmurs. Workers lean against walls, rubbing their shoulders. The sea darkens from blue to ink. Lanterns appear along the docks, each one trembling in the wind. The coffee sacks in the warehouses rest silently, but not peacefully. They are waiting for tide, sail, and opportunity. You hold one bean between finger and thumb. It is small, hard, almost weightless. Yet it has become guarded treasure, devotional aid, traded cargo, and future obsession. In Mocha, coffee learns the ways of the sea, it learns distance, it learns price, it learns how desire travels faster than ships, slipping from port to port in the mind before cargo can catch up. The night settles over the harbour, warm and salt-scented. Ropes creak, water taps softly against hulls. Somewhere, a pot is set over coals, and the familiar dark fragrance rises again, steady as a signal. You breathe it in, and for a moment the whole coast seems awake. You step into the Ottoman world through a doorway low enough to make you bow your head, which feels appropriate, because coffee has a way of making even proud people humble before the cup. The room beyond is warm, shadowed, and alive with murmurs. Smoke hangs beneath the ceiling in soft blue layers. Lamps glow through it like tired stars. Cushions line the walls. Low tables carry tiny cups, pipes, dice, ink-stained papers, and the elbows of men who clearly came for one drink and have stayed long enough to solve ruin and rebuild the empire in conversation. This is the coffee house, and it is one of coffee's most important inventions. You feel the floorboards flex faintly under your steps. The air smells of roasted beans, tobacco, sweat, lamp oil, damp wool, and the sweet resin of burning wood. Somewhere near the hearth, coffee boils in a small pot, dark foam rising and trembling before it is lifted from the heat. The sound is gentle, almost private, a wet whisper under the louder rhythm of voices. Cups clink, a backgammon piece snaps against wood. Someone laughs through his nose as if trying not to encourage foolishness, though he absolutely is encouraging it. By the 16th century, coffee houses appear in major Ottoman cities, especially Istanbul, where they become famous spaces for sociability, entertainment, and discussion. The coffee served is thick, dark, and unfiltered, often prepared in a small metal pot and poured carefully so the grounds settle at the bottom. It is not the large, sleepy mug you may know. It is concentrated, serious, and small enough to look innocent while causing considerable disturbance. You sit on a cushion near the wall. The fabric is worn smooth in places, rough in others, and warm from the bodies that have leaned there all day. A server brings coffee in a tiny cup with no handle, and the heat passes quickly through the porcelain. You hold it by the rim, cautious and slightly dramatic. The first sip is strong, bitter, almost smoky. The grounds thicken near the bottom, a dark sediment that seems to remember everything said above it. Around you, the coffee house performs its real work. Men trade news from the palace, the docks, the army roads, the courts, and the markets. A merchant complains about taxes. A poet recites a line and waits for praise with the delicate patience of someone pretending not to need it. A storyteller begins a tale with such confidence that even the dice players pause. Chess pieces move in slow, thoughtful silence, except for the player who sighs loudly whenever his opponent does anything competent. The mainstream historical fact is simple and powerful. Ottoman coffee houses became public gathering places where men discussed politics, literature, business, religion, gossip, and entertainment. They helped shape urban culture by creating a setting outside the home, mosque, court, or market, where people could linger and exchange ideas. The lingering mattered. Coffee did not merely wake individuals, it gathered them, and gatherings make rulers nervous. You can feel why. A single man drinking coffee is not dangerous, unless he has had 5 cups and is trying to write poetry. But many men sitting together, sharing news, mocking officials, repeating rumours, comparing grievances, and laughing at authority in low voices. That is another matter. The coffee house is warm, social, and apparently harmless, but it also becomes a place where opinion forms. Opinion is invisible at first, like steam. Then it condenses. A quirky tidbit floats through the smoke. Some Ottoman coffee houses hired professional storytellers, shadow puppet performers, musicians, and even wandering scholars to keep customers lingering. In other words, the early coffee house understood the entertainment economy perfectly. Give people caffeine, give them seating, give them a reason to stay, and somehow they will spend the entire evening there while claiming they're just catching up. Humanity has not changed as much as we like to pretend. You watch a storyteller settle near the centre of the room. He lifts one hand and voices fade. His robe smells faintly of dust and old travel. His voice begins low, then curls upward, carrying a tale of tricksters, judges, unlucky husbands, clever wives, sea voyages, saints, fools, and animals far wiser than humans, which is usually believable. He changes tone for each character. The room leans toward him. Even the coffee seems to pause. Yet not all coffee houses are alike. Some are modest neighbourhood rooms. Some sit near markets, busy with traders and artisans. Some attract scholars, poets, or soldiers. Some are known for games, others for music, others, perhaps, for talk so sharp that an official might prefer the door stay open and the names be remembered. Coffee houses are not simply cafés in old costumes. They are flexible public stages. Historians still argue about the exact social reach of early Ottoman coffee houses. Were they truly broad spaces mixing many classes, or did most remain shaped by neighbourhood, profession, and status? Did they encourage political resistance, or did later observers exaggerate their danger because anxious governments have always possessed excellent imaginations? The evidence suggests both energy and limitation. Coffee houses open new possibilities, but not everyone entered them equally. Women, for instance, were largely excluded from many public coffeehouse settings, though coffee itself circulated in domestic spaces as well. Public wakefulness had boundaries. You lift the cup again. The ceramic has cooled. A faint grit touches your tongue. Outside, evening has thickened into night, but inside the room time feels loosened. People arrive, sit, speak, listen, argue, and remain. The coffee house turns hours into company. It offers shelter from weather, loneliness, and boredom, those 3 ancient enemies of urban life. An official passes the doorway and glances in. No one becomes silent, exactly. But the conversation changes shape. A joke ends early. A merchant suddenly cares deeply about the quality of figs. A chess player studies the board with theatrical innocence. The official continues down the street. The voices swell again. It is a small moment, but it reveals the strange power of the place. Coffee has made a room where private thoughts can become public sound. The preparation itself adds to the spell. Beans are roasted dark, crushed fine, and boiled with water until the liquid rises in fragrant foam. Sometimes sugar or spices join the cup, depending on taste and means. The grounds remain inside, settling slowly. When the drink is finished, the dark patterns left behind may be read for fortunes. This practice, tasseography, becomes attached to coffee in parts of the Ottoman world and beyond. A little fringe, a little theatrical, and honestly, quite understandable. After enough caffeine, anyone might believe the sludge is trying to tell them something. You turn the empty cup in your hand. At the bottom, the grounds cling in branching shapes, like roads, rivers, or smoke frozen in place. Someone beside you peers at them and offers a prediction with grave seriousness. Perhaps travel. Perhaps money. Perhaps a difficult conversation. Very bold, considering that all three happen constantly in human life. The night deepens. The lamps burn lower, their flames making the brass pots shine softly. A final round of coffee passes through the room. You feel the warmth in your hands, the cushion beneath you, the smoky air brushing your throat. Outside, the empire continues with its armies, taxes, ceremonies, laws, and ambitions. Inside, men talk. They listen. They laugh. They doubt. And in that low, fragrant room, coffee becomes more than a drink. It becomes a social engine. Quiet at first, then humming with stories, suspicions, cleverness, and the dangerous comfort of staying awake together. You enter a city where coffee has become popular enough to attract trouble, which is usually the moment when a harmless pleasure discovers it has a political life. The streets are narrow and busy, paved by feet, hooves, wheels, and rain. Above you, wooden balconies lean close together as if the houses are whispering across the lane. Lanterns swing in the evening air. A vendor calls from a corner. The smell of baking bread rises from an oven, mixing with dust, animal sweat, perfume, and the dark roasted scent that now seems to slip through every crack in urban life. Coffee is no longer only a drink of devotion or trade. It is a question. You feel the question everywhere. Is coffee permitted? Is it healthy? Is it dangerous? Is it a medicine, a stimulant, a vice, a social blessing, or an excuse for people to sit around talking when they should be doing something more obedient and less interesting? A tiny cup rests on a tray, but around it gather judges, clerics, physicians, rulers, merchants, poets, and ordinary drinkers who would very much like everyone important to calm down. You sit in a room where men debate with careful intensity. The air is close. Wool robes brush against mats. Ink dries slowly on a page. The walls hold the smell of smoke and old plaster. Outside, a mule brays at the worst possible moment, adding its own scholarly opinion. A man lifts a cup and argues that coffee sharpens the mind for prayer and work. Another warns that it stirs the body, disturbs sleep, and draws people into suspicious gatherings. Someone else points out that people have been suspiciously gathering since the beginning of time, and coffee should not take all the blame, though perhaps he phrases it more politely. One mainstream historical fact is important here. Coffee faced bans and religious debates in several Islamic cities during its early spread. In Mecca in the early 16th century, authorities temporarily banned coffee after concerns about coffeehouses and social disorder. In Cairo and elsewhere, debates followed over whether coffee should be treated like intoxicating drink, whether it harmed the body, and whether the places where people consumed it encouraged improper behaviour. These bans rarely ended coffee's use for long. The drink kept returning, because once a city learns the pleasure of staying awake together, it becomes difficult to persuade everyone to go home early like sensible vegetables. You imagine a public inspection. Officials move through the streets, their sandals scuffing dust from the stones. A coffee seller lowers his eyes. A group of drinkers suddenly becomes fascinated by the wall. Pots may be seized. Shops may be closed. The smell of roasted beans still clings to the air, stubborn and faintly smug. Authority can silence a room, but scent is harder to arrest. The legal and religious issue often turned on comparison. Wine was clearly forbidden in Islamic law, but coffee did not intoxicate in the same way. It did not cloud the mind. It sharpened it, sometimes irritatingly. The problem was not drunkenness, but stimulation and sociability. Coffee made people alert, coffeehouses made them talk. Talk made rulers uneasy and moralists exhausted. There is a tragic pattern here. A beverage tries to be useful, and then humans add seating. Physicians also entered the argument. Some praised coffee as warming, drying, stimulating, and helpful for digestion or headaches. Others worried it could damage the body, inflame the blood, weaken desire, disturb rest, or encourage melancholy. Medical theories of the time often relied on humours, balances of hot, cold, wet, and dry qualities. Coffee's bitterness and alerting effect made it easy to classify, criticise, prescribe, and blame for whatever had gone wrong since breakfast. A quirky tidbit curls through these debates like steam in some places. People suspected coffee could reduce sexual appetite, while others claimed the opposite, because history never misses a chance to make one drink responsible for all human behaviour. Imagine sitting with a tiny cup while serious men argue whether it makes you too lively, not lively enough, too social, too awake, too dry, too bold, or insufficiently obedient. At some point, the coffee itself would be forgiven for wishing to remain a shrub. You take a sip, the liquid is hot and bitter. It leaves a dry feeling along your tongue, then a spreading warmth in your chest, around you. The debate continues in tones that rise and fall like a slow tide. The room has the atmosphere of a court, a school, and a family argument all at once. No one agrees completely, but everyone behaves as though the answer matters deeply, and it does matter, because coffee is testing the edges of public life. A drink can be private, a custom can be local, but a habit that fills rooms across cities becomes visible. Once visible, it must be explained. Once explained, it can be judged. And once judged, it may become a symbol. To some, coffee stands for discipline, learning, trade, and sociability. To others, it represents idleness, rumour, irreverence, and the loss of control. Both sides see something real, though neither side owns the whole truth. Historians still argue whether the early bans were mainly religious, medical, moral, economic, or political. The documents often mention morality and public order, but behind those words may stand worries about authority, class mixing, taxation, or the rapid growth of new social spaces. A ruler may say he fears sin. He may also fear satire. A judge may worry about doctrine. He may also dislike the fact that young men now spend evenings laughing in rooms beyond his supervision. Human motives, like unfiltered coffee, tend to leave sediment. You step outside into the night market. The city is not quiet. Metalworkers hammer late at their benches. A baker slides flatbread from a clay oven, and the warm smell makes your stomach wake up with excellent timing. A boy carries a tray of cups through a passage, moving quickly but carefully. Somewhere a door opens, and you hear laughter, then the low hush of conversation being protected. Coffee survives because it is useful in too many ways. It helps scholars study, it keeps worshippers alert, it lets merchants negotiate, it gives travellers warmth, it gives tired workers a moment of strength, it gives talk a centre, it gives the lonely a room to enter. Banning such a thing is not impossible, but it is inconvenient, and inconvenience is one of history's most underrated forces. The courtly debates eventually soften in many places. Coffee becomes accepted, regulated, taxed, enjoyed, and criticised in the ordinary way of all-powerful habits. People learn to bless it, sell it, joke about it, warn against it, and ask for another cup. Its danger does not vanish. It simply becomes familiar. You pause beside a closed stall where the smell of roasted beans seeps from a cloth-covered basket. The street stones hold the day's warmth. Night air cools your face. Somewhere behind a shutter, water begins to boil. A spoon taps a pot. Voices lower, not with fear, exactly, but with the pleasure of secrecy. The drink on trial has not been defeated. It has learned to wait, to return, and to make itself necessary. You arrive in Venice with salt on the wind and bells moving through the morning air. The city rises from the lagoon like a dream that has learned bookkeeping. Water slaps softly against stone steps. Gondolas rock beside mooring poles painted in bright spirals. Merchants cross little bridges with folded papers, guarded expressions, and the peculiar confidence of people who can calculate profit while pretending to admire the view. Here, coffee enters Europe through curiosity, trade, and a great deal of gossip. You walk beneath arcades where shops open toward narrow lanes. The air smells of fish, wax, damp stone, spices, and expensive fabrics stored in wooden chests. From the Eastern Mediterranean and Ottoman markets come goods that make Venice wealthy, and slightly theatrical pepper, silk, carpets, glassware, medicines, dyes, perfumes, and now dark roasted beans that look modest beside all that glamour. Coffee does not glitter. Coffee does not shimmer. Coffee simply waits in a sack, looking like something a pigeon might ignore. Very clever of it. Venetian traders had long connections with the Islamic world, and through those routes coffee reached European attention. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, reports of coffee circulated among travellers, physicians, merchants, and scholars. Some described it as a strange black drink used in the Ottoman lands. Others treated it as medicine. To many Europeans, coffee first appeared not as a familiar pleasure, but as an exotic substance from the East, wrapped in uncertainty and reputation. You enter an apothecary's shop, where the shelves are lined with jars, bundles, powders, and liquids of uncertain personality. Dried herbs hang from the ceiling. The air is sharp with rosemary, vinegar, camphor, cinnamon, dust, and old wood. Behind a counter, a man weighs coffee beans with careful fingers. To him they may seem less like breakfast and more like remedy. In early Europe, coffee was often sold or discussed through medical channels before becoming an everyday drink. It promised wakefulness, aided digestion according to some, stirred the spirits, and offered physicians yet another thing to argue about, which they accepted with professional enthusiasm. You touch the beans in a shallow dish. They are dark, ridged, and oily from roasting. Their scent is strong enough to cut through the heavier smells of the shop. A customer leans in, suspicious but tempted. He asks how it is prepared. The apothecary explains with the solemnity of a priest and the pricing instinct of a merchant. The beans must be roasted, crushed, boiled in water, perhaps sweetened. The liquid will be bitter. This last fact does not help the sale, but honesty occasionally escapes even in commerce. Outside, Venice glows in afternoon light. Water reflects palace walls in broken gold. A woman at a window shakes out cloth. A church door opens, releasing the smell of incense and cool stone. Near the Rialto, the city's trading heart beats loudly. Men discuss cargoes, risks, currency, storms, taxes, and the reliability of distant partners, which is to say, they discuss anxiety in elegant clothing. Coffee's arrival in Christian Europe raised religious unease for some. It was associated with Muslims, Ottoman customs, and unfamiliar social rituals. A story later became famous claiming that advisors urged Pope Clement VIII to ban coffee as a Muslim drink, but that he tasted it and approved it instead. The tale is charming, and possibly too charming to be accepted without caution. Historians question its details, and some treat it as legend rather than firm fact. Still, the story reveals a real tension. Europeans wondered whether coffee belonged outside Christian society, or whether it could be absorbed, blessed, traded, and taxed with a clear conscience. Taxed, of course, is usually where conscience becomes surprisingly flexible. You sit near a window as a small pot is brought to you. The cup is delicate, more suited to courtly fingers than sleepy hands. The drink is dark and unfamiliar. You raise it and breathe in bitterness, smoke, and something faintly fruity beneath the roast. The first sip is not gentle. It grips the tongue. Wine has warmth, beer has weight, chocolate has richness. Coffee arrives like a stern tutor who believes you can do better. A quirky tidbit from early European coffee culture is that some people called it a kind of Arabian wine, not because it intoxicated like wine, but because it was social, dark, foreign, and carried a sense of ritual. The phrase is wonderfully confusing. Imagine inviting a friend to taste Arabian wine, then handing him a bitter, non-alcoholic cup that makes him more alert instead of less. A prank, perhaps, but a historically significant one. Venice, with its appetite for imported luxuries, gives coffee a stage. At first, coffee is expensive. It belongs to merchants, physicians, nobles, diplomats, travellers, and those who enjoy appearing worldly. It is discussed before it is loved. It is sampled before it is desired. It is medicinal, then fashionable, then social. Many habits enter through the front door wearing a doctor's coat, and later settle into the parlour in silk slippers. You hear spoons touch cups, softer than bells. Rain begins outside, tapping the canal surface with tiny silver rings. The room grows close and fragrant. A man across from you makes a face after his first sip, then takes another. Because humans are mysterious creatures. Bitterness can repel at first, then invite. Coffee asks the drinker to learn it. That learning becomes part of its charm. Not everyone is delighted. Some physicians warn that coffee dries the body, disturbs sleep, weakens the nerves, or encourages excessive thought, as though thought were a household pest. Others praise it for clearing the head. Moral critics worry about foreign habits. Traditional drinkers wonder why anyone would choose bitterness without alcohol. Yet curiosity keeps winning small victories. Coffee's greatest ally in Europe is not immediate love. It is intrigue. You leave the room and walk along a narrow canal at dusk. The stones are slick beneath your shoes. Boatman's call echoes between walls. The lagoon smells of salt, mud, and rain. Behind lit windows, Venice counts money, whispers news, and tastes the world one imported habit at a time. The strange bean has crossed into a society ready for novelty and uneasy about it. Venice does not fully tame coffee, but it gives Europe a first sustained taste of its possibility. The drink moves from apothecary shelf to private table, from curiosity to conversation. It carries with it the scent of eastern ports, mountain terraces, religious debate, and merchant risk. In the cup, those distances shrink. You hold the last warm mouthful and feel the edge of wakefulness sharpen gently behind your eyes. Outside, the bells begin again, drifting over dark water. Venice listens, calculates, hesitates, and sips. You enter London on a damp morning, when the city smells of coal smoke, river mud, wet wool, horse dung, frying food, and ambition that has not yet had breakfast. The streets are crowded and uneven, with carts grinding over stones, apprentices shouting, vendors calling, and rainwater sliding through gutters in grey little streams. Above the rooftops, chimneys breathe dark clouds into a low sky. The bells of churches answer one another across the city, solemn and slightly bossy, as bells often are. In this noisy place, coffee finds a new costume. It becomes public information. You follow the smell of roasting beans into a narrow building near the heart of trade. The room is packed. Men stand shoulder to shoulder in coats damp from the weather. Wigs and hats drip near the door. Newspapers, pamphlets, letters, shipping lists, and handwritten notices lie across tables. The air is warm with bodies, ink, tobacco, and coffee so strong it seems to have opinions. Someone coughs into a handkerchief. Someone reads aloud from a printed sheet. Someone interrupts before the sentence is finished, because London has never considered interruption a crime. For 1 penny, you can buy a cup of coffee, an entry into a storm of talk. This is why English coffeehouses came to be nicknamed penny universities. The phrase captures a real social fact in 17th century London. Coffeehouses became places where men could hear news, debate politics, discuss science, conduct business, read printed material, and learn from conversation. They were cheaper than formal education, and far louder than any respectable classroom. Honestly, the furniture was probably less comfortable too, but the gossip was excellent. You take a place near a long table. The wood beneath your fingers is scarred with knife marks, ink stains, and rings from cups. A server brings coffee in a small dish or cup, dark and steaming. It tastes bitter, thin by some later standards, and astonishingly awake. It is not beer, it is not ale. It does not soften the room, it sharpens it. Faces seem more alert, voices cut through the smoke. Thought becomes quick, sometimes useful. sometimes merely confident, which is the dangerous cousin of useful. One mainstream historical fact stands firmly in this smoky room. England's first coffeehouse is usually associated with Oxford in 1650, and London's early coffeehouse culture expanded soon afterward. By the later 17th century, London had many coffeehouses, each with its own crowd and specialty. Some attracted merchants, some drew politicians, some were favoured by writers, scientists, physicians, lawyers, or stock jobbers. The city did not just drink coffee, it sorted itself around coffee. You hear a man near the window read news from abroad. Another corrects him with infuriating certainty. At a table by the wall, merchants discuss ships overdue from the Mediterranean. A pair of gentlemen argue about parliament, taxation, religion, and whether the nation is collapsing, which appears to be a traditional English pastime. At another table, a natural philosopher describes an experiment involving air pressure, glass vessels, and the kind of excitement that makes everyone else politely nervous. A quirky tidbit belongs to this world of caffeine and paper. Some coffee houses became so specialised that they functioned almost like informal offices. Lloyd's Coffee House, for example, became associated with shipping news and marine insurance. Jonathan's Coffee House became linked with stock trading. A man could walk in for coffee and walk out having insured a ship, bought shares, heard a rumour about war, and ruined his mood before noon, efficient in a grim sort of way. The sensory world is thick around you, tobacco smoke scratches your throat, the wool of your sleeve feels damp at the cuff, the floor is gritty beneath your shoes, coffee grounds cling to the bottom of cups, newspapers rustle like restless birds, rain taps the window panes, a fire pops in the hearth, giving off brief sparks and a smell of charred wood beneath the heavier coal smoke outside. Coffee houses altered how information moved. Printed news was growing, but not everyone owned papers or read quietly at home. In coffee houses, reading became social. A literate man could read aloud to others, rumours could be tested, inflated, mocked, or sent onward. A letter from a port might change the mood of a whole room. A pamphlet could ignite laughter or outrage. Coffee did not create the public sphere by itself, but it gave that sphere heat, seating, and an excuse to linger. Authorities noticed. They always do. In 1675, King Charles II issued a proclamation attempting to suppress coffee houses, accusing them of spreading false news and malicious talk. The order met resistance and was quickly withdrawn. The episode reveals the fear these places inspired. A government could tolerate men drinking, it could tolerate men talking, but men drinking something that made them talk more clearly, in rooms full of pamphlets, about matters of state that was practically asking anxiety to put on a crown. Historians still debate how politically radical the coffee houses truly were. Some scholars see them as vital spaces of public debate and early modern democratic conversation. Others warn that access was limited by gender, class, money, literacy, and custom. Women were generally excluded from the main culture of London coffee houses, and not every man's voice carried equal weight. The penny bought entry, but it did not erase hierarchy. Even in a room buzzing with talk, some people were heard more than others. History enjoys giving us inspiring scenes, then quietly pointing out the doorman. You notice this as you listen. A wealthy merchant speaks, and men lean in. A poorer tradesman speaks, and some listen, some do not. A servant moves through the room carrying cups, hearing everything, asked almost nothing. Outside, a woman passes the window with a basket covered in cloth, her face turned against the rain. The coffee house calls itself public, but public has edges. Still, within those edges, something powerful unfolds. Business becomes faster, science becomes more conversational, politics becomes harder to contain. The city becomes legible through talk. You can learn which ships arrived, which pamphlet has offended whom, which minister is disliked, which invention might matter, which war is feared, which rumour is nonsense, and which nonsense is profitable. You lift your cup again. It has cooled, leaving a bitter trace and a thin film at the rim. Around you, the room keeps moving. You pen scratch, dice click, men laugh, argue, calculate, boast, listen, and pretend not to listen. A newcomer enters, shakes rain from his hat, and immediately asks what news there is. That question is the true password. London's coffee houses turn coffee into an engine of urban attention. They gather the city's restless mind into crowded rooms and feed it heat by the cup. They are smoky, male, noisy, imperfect, and alive. They smell terrible in several directions at once. But inside them, information becomes social energy, and social energy begins to feel like power. Outside, the rain eases. The street shines black under the clouds. A church bell marks the hour, though hardly anyone inside seems ready to obey it. The cups are refilled. The papers are passed along. The talk continues, bright and unruly, rising with the steam. You enter Paris beneath a sky the colour of pewter, with the streets shining from recent rain, and the air carrying the smell of wet stone, horse sweat, bread crust, candle wax, and perfume drifting from passing sleeves. The city feels elegant and grimy at the same time, which is a very Parisian achievement. Coaches rattle over uneven paving, shop signs creak in the wind. A woman lifts her skirt slightly above a puddle. A bookseller watches the street with the guarded look of someone selling ideas that may or may not be safe by Thursday. Coffee here does not merely wake the body, whereas it sharpens style. You step into a café glowing with mirrors, candles, polished wood, and the warm breath of conversation. The door closes behind you, softening the street noise into a muffled roar. Inside, spoons ring against porcelain, chairs scrape, silk rustles, smoke curls through the light. The room smells of coffee, sugar, tobacco, damp wool, and the faint powdery scent of wigs. A waiter moves quickly between tables, carrying cups with the solemn grace of a man transporting diplomacy in liquid form. Parisian café culture rises strongly in the late 17th and 18th centuries. One famous landmark is Café Procope, opened in the 1680s, which became associated with writers, actors, philosophers, political talk, and literary society. Coffee arrived in France through courtly curiosity, trade, and fashion, but the café gave it a new social body. Here, the drink becomes part of urban elegance, intellectual performance, and public discussion. Paris does not simply drink coffee. Paris stages coffee. You take a seat near a wall where candlelight trembles against glass. The chair is firmer than it looks, because beauty and comfort have always had a complicated relationship. A cup is set before you, small and fine, the coffee dark beneath a pale shimmer of heat. Sugar waits nearby. This matters. In France, as in much of Europe, coffee often entered polite society sweetened, softened, and served with ceremony. The bitterness remains, but now it wears lace. Around you, conversation moves in layers. At one table, two men discuss a new play with enough intensity to suggest the survival of the nation depends on the third act. At another, a pamphlet changes hands beneath a folded napkin. A young lawyer argues about rights, law, and representation, his voice low but quick. Near the window, a gentleman reads a gazette, then looks over the top of it to announce news as if he personally invented being informed. This is where coffee begins to blend with French political weather, not always openly, not always dramatically, but persistently. Cafés become places where news is read, rumours circulate, reputations rise and fall, and sharp language finds an audience. The salon remains important, especially in elite social life, but the café has a different rhythm. It is more public, more restless, more porous. You do not need to own a grand drawing room to sit at a café table and look concerned about liberty. A quirky tidbit brightens the room. Early Parisian cafés often served more than coffee. They offered chocolate, sherbets, liqueurs, pastries, ices, and other fashionable refreshments. So while philosophers debated reason, nature, monarchy, and the structure of society, someone nearby may have been quietly enjoying a frozen dessert. Humanity is rarely as severe as portraits suggest. The Enlightenment, apparently, came with snacks. You lift the cup. The porcelain is smooth and warm against your fingers. The coffee tastes bitter first, then sweet where sugar has settled, then smoky at the back of the throat. It wakes you gently, not like a trumpet, more like someone opening curtains in a room you forgot had windows. The atmosphere hums. Thoughts seem to move faster under candlelight. Paris in the 18th century is a city of print, performance, rumour, surveillance, and appetite. Pamphlets travel quickly, songs carry insults, caricatures bite, theatres, bookshops, salons, Masonic lodges, cafés, and street corners all help circulate ideas. Coffee is not the single cause of anything, because history is not a lazy machine with one button. But it gives people a reason to gather while sober, alert, and willing to talk. This is not a small gift. Officials understand the problem. Police spies and informers sometimes monitored cafes and other public places, listening for dangerous speech or signs of discontent. You can imagine one now, sitting too still at a corner table, pretending to admire the foam while carefully collecting opinions. He wears plain clothes, keeps his face neutral, and probably orders very slowly to justify staying longer. Every age has its awkward undercover listener. Historians still argue about how much cafes directly shaped revolutionary politics compared with deeper causes such as fiscal crisis, social inequality, war debt, food prices, Enlightenment writing, and struggles between crown and institutions. The answer is not simple. A cafe does not bankrupt a monarchy. A cup does not write a constitution, but spaces of talk matter because they help private frustration become shared understanding. They allow people to hear that their doubts are not solitary. Once grievances find company, they become harder to dismiss as mere bad mood. You notice the small mechanics of this transformation. A man reads aloud from a printed sheet. Others lean closer. Someone laughs bitterly at a minister's name. A phrase is repeated, improved, sharpened. Another person carries it to a different table. By evening, the phrase may have crossed a district. By week's end, it may feel like common sense. Ideas often travel this way, not as grand thunderbolts, but as small sparks passed hand to hand over coffee cups. The touch of the table beneath your palm is cool marble, faintly sticky where sugar has spilled. Your shoes rest on a floor scattered with straw and grit. The candles burn lower, giving off the smell of hot wax. Outside, wheels pass through puddles with a soft hiss. Inside, the room grows louder as the night deepens. Coffee permits wakefulness, and wakefulness permits one more argument. A writer at the next table dips his pen and scratches quickly across paper. His cuff is stained with ink. His face carries the pale excitement of someone who believes words can rearrange the world. A noble condition and occasionally a dangerous one. He pauses, sips, grimaces, then writes again. The coffee does not think for him. It merely refuses to let him drift too soon into sleep. You sit quietly while Paris wakes in darkness, not the waking of morning bells and market carts, but another kind, mental, social, electric in a candlelit way. The city's polished rooms and muddy streets are filling with conversation. Some talk is vain, some is foolish, some is brave, some is watched, some will vanish before dawn, some will remain. The waiter returns with fresh coffee, his tray balanced neatly above the crowd. Cups clatter softly as he sets them down. Steam rises, voices lean inward. Beyond the glass, the wet street reflects the cafe lights in long trembling lines, as if the city itself has begun to think. You sit at a table where the candle is burned low enough to gather a little lake of wax around its base. The flame bends whenever the door opens, then straightens itself with quiet dignity, as if even fire has learned manners in an age of reason. Around you, cups cool, papers multiply, and voices continue their patient work of asking whether the world must remain exactly as it is. This is a dangerous question when asked once. It is far more dangerous when asked every evening by people with ink, arguments, and coffee. The Enlightenment does not happen in one room. Of course, it spreads across cities, libraries, academies, salons, printing shops, universities, private studies, royal courts, taverns, and cafés. It is not a single movement with one neat opinion. It is a restless cluster of habits questioning authority, valuing observation, comparing societies, organizing knowledge, debating natural rights, criticizing superstition, measuring the heavens, cataloguing plants, improving machines, and occasionally becoming so proud of the reason that reason itself might have wished for a nap. Coffee fits this world beautifully. You walk through a European city of the 18th century, where morning mist lifts from roofs and bells mark the hour with old religious certainty, while below, new secular conversations begin to stir. A printer opens his shutters. The smell of ink, damp paper, and metal type floats into the street. A bookseller unwraps pamphlets tied with string. A student hurries past with cold hands tucked into his sleeves. Somewhere behind a window, a kettle hisses, and a roasted coffee fills the room with its dark, steady fragrance. One mainstream historical fact is clear coffeehouses and cafés became important meeting places for writers, philosophers, scientists, merchants, and politically interested readers during the Enlightenment. They helped connect printed culture with spoken debate. A book might be written in private, printed in a shop, reviewed in a journal, read aloud in a café, disputed at a table, and carried into another city by letter or memory. Coffee was not the source of reason, but it warmed the rooms where reason became social. You enter such a room and feel the change at once. The air is less smoky than some taverns, though still far from pure. Tobacco lingers, wet coats steam by the door. Coffee mingles with the smell of sealing wax and old paper. A man in a dark coat reads from a newspaper while tapping one finger on the margin. Another has brought a small scientific instrument wrapped in cloth. A third insists that human society could be improved if only people would stop being so attached to inherited nonsense, which is an ambitious proposal for a species that still argues over seating. The cup in your hand is warm, smooth, and slightly thin at the rim. You taste bitterness, sugar, and a faint burnt edge from the roast. Your mind feels gently lit. You are not frantic. You are attentive. That is coffee's intellectual gift, not wisdom. Never that simple, but alertness. It keeps the eyes open long enough for comparison, contradiction, and revision. It encourages the person who says, wait, but why, which is either the beginning of philosophy or the beginning of everyone else's headache. The Enlightenment loves systems. Encyclopedias gather knowledge into alphabetical order, a heroic attempt to make the universe behave. Natural philosophers classify animals, minerals, stars, and diseases. Economists imagine laws of trade and labour. Political thinkers compare monarchy, republics, empires, and ancient constitutions. Coffee accompanies this organising impulse. It sits beside ledgers, notebooks, specimen boxes, and manuscripts, a small dark ally to people trying to arrange the chaos of existence into columns. A quirky tidbit belongs to the legendary coffee habits of certain thinkers. Voltaire was famously associated with enormous coffee consumption, though the exact number of cups reported is probably exaggerated by admirers, enemies, or people who enjoyed picturing him as a caffeinated lightning rod in a dressing gown. Whether he drank dozens of cups a day or merely enough to alarm his friends, the legend captures something true about coffee's image. It belonged to wit, speed, argument, and sharpness. It was the beverage of people who wanted the mind to spark. You sit near a scholar who's making notes with a quill that scratches softly across the page. He pauses to warm his fingers around his cup. His nails are ink-stained. His face is tired. The table is crowded with a journal, a letter, a slice of bread, and crumbs that have entered the Republic of Knowledge without permission. He reads a paragraph about electricity, then another about ancient law, then turns to discuss both as if they belong naturally together. In this age, many people believe connections can be found everywhere. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes they need more sleep. Historians still dispute how broad the Enlightenment public truly was. Some emphasize the growth of debate beyond courts and churches, helped by print, coffeehouses, salons, learned societies, and correspondence. Others point out that many people remained excluded by poverty, gender, race, censorship, illiteracy, or geography. The public sphere was real, but uneven. Ideas about universal reason often moved through very unequal rooms. A servant might hear the argument while carrying the tray. A woman might shape discussion in a salon but be unwelcome in a coffee house. Enslaved people might be discussed in essays by men drinking coffee grown through colonial labour. The age of reason had shadows under the table. You feel that contradiction in the cup itself. Coffee helps people imagine liberty, yet coffee is increasingly tied to plantations and coerced labour in distant colonies. It sharpens moral debate while benefiting from systems many debaters do not fully confront. The drink is never innocent simply because it tastes austere. Bitterness can hide many things. Still, in the room around you, something remarkable is happening. People are practicing disagreement, not always kindly, not always fairly, but repeatedly. They test claims. They mock bad arguments. They ask for evidence. They compare reports from travellers. They learn to distrust old certainties, sometimes replacing them with better ideas, sometimes with fashionable nonsense wearing powdered wig. Human progress rarely moves in a straight line. It wanders, spills coffee, corrects itself, and pretends it meant to do that. The candle gutters. Outside, carriage wheels roll through the night. Inside, the conversation turns from astronomy to taxation, from education to religious tolerance, from ancient Rome to the price of bread. The topics shift, but the atmosphere remains the same: alert, questioning, faintly smoky and warmed by dark cups. The Enlightenment does not belong to coffee, but coffee belongs to the Enlightenment's daily rhythm. It is there when ideas become talk, when talk becomes print, and when print returns to the table as another argument waiting to begin. You take the last sip. Grounds cling near the bottom like a small black map. The room continues to murmur. Somewhere, a page turns. Somewhere, a spoon rings softly against porcelain, and in that quiet sound, the world feels, for a moment, open to revision. You stand in a room where the air feels too warm for the season, not because of the fire, but because everyone inside is trying not to sound nervous. Coffee sits in cups along the tables, dark and cooling, while men bend over papers with their shoulders close together. Outside, the street carries the ordinary noises of wheels, footsteps, barking dogs, and a vendor calling his goods with the brave indifference of someone who does not know history is leaning against the wall nearby. Inside, whispers turn into plans. Revolution rarely begins with a trumpet. It begins with a complaint repeated often enough to become a rhythm. You move through the rooms where coffee keeps company with unrest. A café in Paris, bright with mirrors and candle smoke. A colonial tavern room where coffee replaces boycotted tea. A meeting space where merchants mutter about taxes. A printer's shop where the smell of ink rises beside a pot left warming near the hearth. Coffee appears in all these places not as a magical cause, because no bean has ever overthrown a government on its own, charming though the image may be. It appears as a companion to talk, alertness, news, and stubbornness. One mainstream historical fact is clear in the decades surrounding the American and French revolutions. Coffeehouses and cafés served as important gathering places where political ideas, pamphlets, rumours, and strategies circulated. They did not create inequality, debt, imperial conflict, bad harvests, or constitutional crisis. Those problems had their own deep roots, but coffee helped animate the social spaces where people discussed them. It gave sleepless energy to those who read, argued, organised, and sometimes convinced themselves that one more meeting would fix everything. Humanity remains optimistic in the most exhausting ways. You sit at a small table in a French café as a paper is unfolded. The sheet is thin, rough beneath the reader's fingers, still smelling faintly of damp ink. A man reads aloud in a low voice. Around him, cups pause halfway to mouths. The words concern rights, representation, grain, privilege, debt, and the strange idea that ordinary people might have claims against power. The coffee is bitter and hot. The candlelight trembles. A chair creaks as someone leans in. The room is not all heroic seriousness. A man at the next table spills coffee on his cuff and tries to hide it while discussing the fate of nations. Another speaks too loudly after one cup too many. Not drunk, exactly, but caffeinated into the dangerous confidence of a rooster. Gentle sarcasm belongs here, because revolutions are made by humans, and humans can demand liberty while arguing over who took the better seat. Across the Atlantic, coffee takes on another political flavour. In British North America, tea becomes entangled with taxes, protest, imperial authority, and resistance. Coffee, already known and consumed, gains symbolic value as some colonists choose it over tea. Refusing tea could signal opposition to British policy. Drinking coffee could become a small daily gesture of political identity. The cup at breakfast becomes part of a larger argument. Imagine trying to start your morning and accidentally declaring your ideology. Very efficient, if slightly stressful. You enter a colonial room lit by a smoky fire. Snow presses against the window, or perhaps cold rain, the kind that makes wooden walls breathe dampness. The table smells of pine, wax, leather, and spilled coffee. Men in plain coats examine letters from other towns. A woman moves near the hearth, listening while pretending to be busy with cups, because public politics often depended on private labour that later stories forget to name. The coffee pot hisses softly, a spoon taps ceramic. Outside, hoofbeats pass and fade. The coffee here is rougher, perhaps boiled longer than elegance recommends. It grips the tongue, it warms the throat. You feel the cup's heat through your fingers, a practical comfort in a cold room. Talk circles around boycotts, committees, trade, liberty, loyalty, and fear. Nobody knows how far events will go. That uncertainty gives every sentence a sharper edge. A quirky tidbit belongs to the age of revolutionary coffee substitutes and patriotic consumption. During periods of shortage or boycott, people experimented with roasted grains, roots, peas, rye, acorns, and other substitutes meant to imitate coffee. Many were probably heroic in intention and tragic in flavour. It is touching, really, to imagine someone roasting barley and saying, "This is almost coffee," while everyone else silently practices courage. In Paris, the café becomes even more charged as crisis deepens. Public speakers draw crowds. Newspapers and pamphlets multiply. Names rise and fall with alarming speed. One famous revolutionary association centres on the Café de Foyer and the Palais Royal, where speakers stirred crowds in 1789. These public places helped transform private anger into collective action. Coffee was there, but so were hunger, debt, censorship, ambition, ideals, and fear. The cup did not command the crowd. It warmed the hands of those who joined it. Scholars still debate how much coffeehouses directly caused revolutionary movements, compared with their role as amplifiers of deeper social and economic pressures. Some view them as crucial nodes of communication. Others caution against romanticising them as democratic spaces, since access often excluded women, the poor, enslaved people, and many labourers whose suffering made revolution urgent. The café table could discuss the people while not fully containing them. History's public rooms have always had doors, and doors decide more than architecture admits. You notice the tension in the atmosphere. A man speaks of universal rights, while a servant clears his cup without being asked his opinion. A merchant condemns tyranny, but worries about his own accounts. A pamphleteer praises virtue, then quietly checks whether anyone important heard him. Ideals glow, but they cast shadows. Coffee brightens the room without purifying it. Still, something powerful happens when people gather awake. News travels from mouth to mouth. Anger discovers language. Fear discovers company. Someone who thought alone in silence now hears his thoughts spoken by another. A phrase becomes a slogan. A grievance becomes a list. A list becomes a petition. A petition becomes a demand. The sound of cups and spoons may seem delicate, but in a restless city, delicate sounds can accompany enormous change. You walk out into the street, the night is damp, and the stones shine under torchlight. Your coat smells of smoke, coffee, and crowded bodies. Behind you, the room continues murmuring. Ahead, another door opens. More voices spill into the dark. No one knows which words will vanish, and which will survive as history. That is always the strange thing about living through change. It feels like confusion until someone later gives it a name. You pause beneath a window where candlelight glows behind thin curtains. A fresh pot is being poured inside. The fragrance drifts outward, bitter and steady. It carries no flag by itself, yet it moves through rooms where flags are imagined. It makes no speech, yet it sits beside speech. It writes no manifesto, yet stains the fingers of those who do. The city breathes around you, alert and uneasy. Coffee warms the hand, sharpens the eye, and keeps the conversation from ending too soon. And sometimes, when enough conversations refuse to end, the world outside the cup begins to tremble. You walk from the bright rooms of debate into a landscape where coffee grows under a heavier silence. The air is hot, wet, and close, pressing against your skin like a damp hand. Leaves shine under the sun. Insects pulse in the shade with a steady, metallic whine. The smell is green at first, crushed plants, rich soil, standing water, and fruit beginning to ripen. Then another smell rises beneath it, sweat, smoke, leather, and the sharp dust of work. Here, coffee becomes empire in the ground. You stand at the edge of a plantation, where rows of coffee shrubs stretch across slopes and cleared fields. Their leaves are dark and glossy. Their cherries ripen red among the branches, pretty enough to seem innocent if you do not look at the hands reaching for them. People move between the rows with baskets, bending, picking, carrying, repeating the same motions until muscles ache and the day becomes a long measurement of endurance. The sun sits high. The shade is never quite enough. One mainstream historical fact must be faced clearly as coffee spread beyond Yemen into colonial territories, especially in the Caribbean, Latin America, and parts of Asia and Africa. Plantation systems often relied on enslaved or coerced labour. European demand for coffee grew alongside colonial expansion, and the elegant cup in a city café was frequently connected to brutal labour regimes far away. Coffee did not only fuel conversation about liberty, it was also produced within systems that denied liberty to millions. History is impolite that way. It refuses to keep its contradictions in separate rooms. You step carefully along a muddy path. The soil sucks at your shoes. A basket strap digs into a worker's shoulder nearby, leaving a dark line across cloth damp with sweat. The cherries make a soft pattering sound as they drop into woven containers. A supervisor's voice carries from the field's edge. Birds call from the trees that remain beyond the cleared land, their bright notes strangely cheerful above the tired silence of labour. Coffee cultivation demands attention. Plants need suitable altitude, rainfall, shade or sun depending on region and method, careful picking, and processing after harvest. The cherries must be pulped, fermented, washed or dried, sorted, and prepared for shipment. None of this happens by magic. Although consumers have often preferred to imagine commodities appearing in shops by means of civilized fog, every smooth cup begins with repeated physical acts, many of them exhausting. You approach a drying yard where coffee cherries or parchment coffee lie spread across broad surfaces. The heat radiates upward. Workers rake the beans in thin lines so they dry evenly. The sound is soft and scratchy, like brooms over sand. The smell changes here less leafy, more fermented, fruity, sour and warm. Flies circle. The light is harsh enough to make everything seem exposed, even the things people are trying not to see. A quirky tidbit from plantation coffee culture is that some estates developed highly specific routines and tools for sorting beans by size, colour, and defect, long before modern café language made everyone sound like a gem inspector. A single imperfect bean could be picked out by hand. People who had little control over their own lives were required to perfect the luxury consumed by others. It is a small detail, but it says a great deal, and not softly. The plantation is not only a farm, it is a system of power. Land is claimed, forests are cleared, labour is controlled, output is recorded, and profit flows outward. Ledgers turn human effort into columns. Overseers count baskets, merchants count sacks, ship owners count cargo, planters count returns. Somewhere far away, drinkers count spoons of sugar. The numbers connect, though they do not suffer equally. You hear the creak of a mill used to remove pulp from cherries. Wood groans, water splashes. Hands guide the fruit through the process. The machine seems simple, but its rhythm is relentless. Crush, separate, wash, carry, dry. A worker's fingers are stained. Another's feet are cracked from wet ground and heat. The atmosphere is not dramatic in the theatrical sense. It is worse than that. It is ordinary. Systems of exploitation survive partly by becoming routine. Historians still debate how regional differences shaped the severity and organization of coffee labor. Plantation life in St. Domingue, Brazil, Java, Cuba, and other coffee zones did not follow one identical pattern. Laws, terrain, crop cycles, market prices, resistance, disease, and local power all mattered. Some places relied heavily on enslaved African labor. Others used forced cultivation, debt peonage, indenture, or harsh wage systems. The broad truth remains coffee's global rise was deeply entangled with coercion, and the precise forms varied across time and place. You sit for a moment beneath the partial shade of a tree. The bark is rough against your back, your shirt clings to you. The field murmurs with insects and labor. Somewhere, a child cries, then is hushed. A pot of thin food simmers near a worker's dwelling, giving off the smell of starch, smoke, and salt. The contrast between plantation and café is almost unbearable. In one place, coffee is leisure, wit, philosophy, refinement. In another, it is heat, compulsion, injury, and fear. And yet workers were never merely silent figures in a planter's account book. They resisted in ways open and hidden. They slowed work, broke tools, fled, preserved cultural practices, formed families under pressure, shared knowledge, plotted rebellion, negotiated small spaces of autonomy, and carried memory. In some coffee regions, enslaved and coerced people shaped agricultural skill itself. They knew the plants, the seasons, the pests, the soil, the drying, the handling. The plantation owner might claim mastery, but the crop depended on hands and knowledge he did not create. You look at a coffee shrub more closely. The cherries are beautiful, deep red under the leaves. Beauty can be unsettling when it grows inside injustice. You touch one cherry, smooth and warm from the sun. Its skin gives slightly beneath your finger. Inside, the seeds wait pale and hard, ready to travel into trade. The plant has no conscience. The market claims not to have one. People must provide it, and often arrive late. By evening, the field cools only a little. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Workers return with slow steps, baskets emptied, backs bent. Frogs begin calling from wet ground. The drying yard fades from gold to grey. Far away, perhaps across an ocean, someone will lift a cup and praise its aroma without sensing this field in the steam. You remain with the smell of damp earth and roasted possibility not yet roasted. Coffee's bitterness deepens here. It is no longer only the pleasing bitterness of taste. It is moral bitterness, the kind that lingers after the cup is empty, the drink that gathered thinkers, merchants, rebels, and dreamers also bound itself to labour taken by force. To understand coffee, you have to hold both truths in the same hand, warm, dark, and difficult. You stand beside a ship preparing to leave harbour, watching men load cargo beneath a sky the colour of polished pewter. The air tastes of salt and tar. Ropes creak. Gulls cry with the rude confidence of creatures who have never paid customs duties. Barrels thud against planks. Sailors move with practised impatience, their hands rough from hemp and seawater. Somewhere among the ordinary goods, hidden in damp wrappings or guarded in a planter's case, a living coffee plant waits to betray a monopoly. Coffee seeds can travel easily as trade goods. Living coffee plants are another matter. They're delicate, thirsty, and deeply unreasonable passengers. They need protection from salt spray, heat, cold, rot, and neglect. A dried bean in a sack may cross oceans quietly. A living seedling demands care like a spoiled aristocrat, except the aristocrat is worth a fortune if it survives. One mainstream historical fact is central here as demand for coffee grew. European powers and their agents worked to obtain viable coffee plants and establish cultivation in colonies beyond Yemen. This movement helped break Yemen's early dominance of coffee production, and made possible the massive expansion of coffee agriculture across Asia, the Caribbean, and the Americas. The spread involved botanical gardens, colonial officials, merchants, sailors, enslaved workers, and smugglers. A cup that once depended on guarded trade now began to depend on transplanted life. You walk into the humid corner of a ship where a small plant is packed in soil. Its leaves are glossy but anxious looking. If a plant can be accused of facial expression, the wooden box around it smells of wet earth, straw, and faint mould. A sailor lifts the lid for inspection, then closes it quickly against the wind. The plant's roots cling to foreign soil while the ship rocks underfoot. You feel the deck shift beneath you, a slow rise and dip that makes your stomach consider writing a formal complaint. Stories of coffee smuggling often cluster around daring individuals. Some accounts describe Baba Budan, a Sufi figure from India, carrying coffee seeds from the Arabian Peninsula to the hills of Mysore, supposedly hiding 7 beans. The number 7 gives the story a pleasing legendary shape, tidy and sacred sounding, which always makes historians raise one eyebrow, whether the details are exact or embellished. The tradition points to a real process. Coffee escaped guarded systems through religious travel, trade routes, and human determination. A quirky tidbit is that coffee's global spread sometimes depended on botanical diplomacy that sounds almost romantic. In the early 18th century, a coffee plant from Amsterdam's botanical collection was given to France, and from such cultivated plants came further attempts to establish coffee in French colonies. One famous tale follows Gabriel de Clieu, who transported a coffee seedling to Martinique and, according to his own account, shared his limited water ration with it during a difficult voyage. Picture a weary naval officer nursing a plant across the Atlantic like a fragile green celebrity. History can be absurdly tender when profit is involved. You imagine that voyage. The ship groans at night, its timbers swelling and shrinking with moisture. The hold smells of bilge water, wood, tar, stale food, and human closeness. Above deck, the wind cracks the sails. The little plant trembles in its case. Salt dries on your lips. Your shirt sticks to your back. Days blur into glare and spray. If fresh water runs low, every cup becomes a calculation. To pour even a little onto leaves is either devotion, investment, or madness. Often in history, those are difficult to separate. The movement of coffee plants also passes through botanical gardens, those elegant laboratories of empire where science and conquest shake hands politely. European powers collected plants not only for curiosity, but for wealth. Gardens in places such as Amsterdam and Paris helped study, propagate, and distribute economically valuable species. A plant in a pot might look peaceful, even decorative, but it could carry the future of plantations, taxes, labour systems, and international rivalry in its roots. Historians still argue over the reliability of several famous coffee transfer stories. Some narratives come from later retellings, patriotic traditions, personal memoirs, or commercial myth-making. The broad pattern is certain, but the exact drama of hidden seeds, heroic voyages, and single-parent plants can be harder to prove. Coffee history loves a good escape story. Evidence, being less romantic, sometimes asks everyone to lower their voices and check the records. You step into a colonial garden where a surviving coffee seedling is planted under watchful eyes. The soil is dark and damp, the air is warm, thick with the smell of leaves, blossoms, and rain-soaked earth. Insects tick and hum. A gardener presses soil around the roots, careful not to snap the stem. The plant is small, almost unimpressive. It does not look like a revolution in agriculture. It looks like something a goat might consider briefly, which is not reassuring. Yet from such plants, coffee begins to multiply across colonial landscapes. In Java, the Dutch developed coffee cultivation under harsh systems of control. In the Caribbean, French and other European colonies expanded production. In the Americas, coffee took root in climates that could support it, setting the stage for enormous future industries. Each transplant changed the map of supply. Each successful crop weakened old trade restrictions. Each new plantation tied coffee more tightly to colonial ambition. You touch a leaf. It is cool, smooth, and flexible. The plant seems silent, but around it people are already imagining fortunes. Officials see revenue, merchants see cargo, planters see estates, labourers, willingly or not, will be made to see work. The living seed carries possibility, but possibility is never innocent. It depends on the hands that shape it and the systems that claim it. At dusk, rain begins in large warm drops. The garden darkens. Leaves shine. Water gathers on the coffee plant and slips down its stem into the soil. The smell of wet earth deepens, rich and almost sweet. Somewhere nearby, a clerk records the planting date with neat strokes of ink. Somewhere else, a merchant waits for news. The plant drinks quietly, unaware of ledgers, empires, smuggling legends, and future cups raised in distant rooms. You watch the rain soften the ground around its roots. Coffee has learned to travel alive. That changes everything. No longer only a guarded export from one region, it becomes a crop that empires can chase, steal, cultivate, and multiply. A few seeds in a pouch, a seedling in a box, a plant watered through hardship. These small green acts open the way for coffee to become a global system. The night settles warm and damp. Frogs begin calling from the edges of the garden. The leaves tremble under rain. In the darkness, the young coffee plant stands quietly, already surrounded by desire. You walk into Brazil under a wide morning sky, where the land seems to stretch farther than thought can comfortably follow. Hills roll outward in green folds. The air is warm, heavy with the smell of red earth, leaves, animal sweat, and smoke rising from distant kitchens. Cicadas pulse in the trees like tiny machines with no respect for quiet. Under your feet, the soil is rich and rust-coloured, staining shoes, hems, hands, and history with the same stubborn red. Coffee takes root here with enormous force. At first, the shrubs look modest. They stand in rows, glossy and dark-leaved, with small white blossoms when flowering and red cherries when ripe. Yet across the 19th century, these rows multiply until they reshape a nation. Brazil becomes the world's leading coffee producer, and coffee becomes central to its economy, politics, labour systems, railways, ports, and image abroad. A plant that once seemed like a guarded secret now spreads across vast estates, feeding markets that grow hungrier with every decade. You stand on a fazenda, a large coffee estate. As the day begins, workers move into the fields carrying baskets and tools. The morning is not yet fierce, but heat is already gathering. Leaves brush against sleeves with a dry whisper. A rooster calls from near the buildings, sounding extremely proud of an achievement shared by every rooster everywhere. Somewhere, a cartwheel creaks, harness leather groans, hooves strike packed earth with dull, steady beats. One mainstream historical fact rests heavily in this landscape. Brazil's coffee boom depended first on enslaved labour, and later on immigrant and wage labour after abolition in 1888. The crop expanded dramatically in regions such as the Paraíba Valley and São Paulo, helping build fortunes while also deepening inequalities. Coffee was not just agriculture, it was power organised in rows. You watch hands reach into branches to strip ripe cherries. The fruit falls into baskets with a soft clicking patter. The work requires speed and repetition. A single motion becomes hundreds, then thousands. Fingers grow sticky from pulp. Shoulders ache beneath the weight of harvest. Dust rises. Sweat runs down necks and vanishes into collars. The air smells of crushed leaves, warm fruit, dry soil, and bodies working under the sun. On the estate, everything is arranged toward output. There are fields, drying yards, storage buildings, worker quarters, stables, water channels, and roads leading toward transport. Coffee must be picked, processed, dried, sorted, bagged, and moved. At the drying yard, beans lie spread in broad, pale layers, and people rake them again and again so as moisture leaves evenly. The rake teeth scrape with a soothing, sandy rhythm. It might almost be peaceful, if you forgot why so many bodies are bent beneath the sun. History does not permit that forgetfulness for long. A quirky tidbit belongs to Brazil's coffee barons, who sometimes built grand mansions on rural estates or in cities, filling them with imported furniture, European pianos, mirrors, tiles, and decorative luxuries. Some estates were so wealthy that their owners tried to recreate little islands of Parisian polish in the middle of coffee country. One can imagine a salon with velvet chairs and refined music, while outside, the entire fortune smells unmistakably of soil, sweat, and drying beans. Elegance, in such places, had mud on its boots. Coffee also transforms movement. Railroads spread in coffee regions because heavy sacks must reach ports efficiently. São Paulo's rise is closely tied to coffee wealth, immigration, and transport networks. Ports such as Santos become crucial gateways through which Brazilian coffee reaches the world. You hear the future in the distance iron wheels, steam whistles, warehouse cranes, ship bells, and clerks counting sacks with the solemn devotion of people who believe numbers can tame nature. You follow a wagon road where dust coats your tongue. The sacks are stacked high, rough against the hands, smelling faintly green and dry before roasting. Men guide oxen or mules along the route. Later, trains take on more of this burden, cutting through landscapes with smoke and noise. Coffee links the interior to the coast, the field to the exchange, the estate to European and North American breakfast tables. Every cup becomes a map, though most drinkers never see the lines. Brazilian coffee culture is also shaped by labour transition. After abolition, planters increasingly relied on immigrant labour, especially from Italy, Portugal, Spain, Japan, and other places over time, though conditions varied widely and could be harsh. Families arrived with hopes, debts, contracts, fears, and children who learned the smell of coffee fields before they learned the language fully. Some found opportunity, many faced exploitation. The plantation changed its legal form, but power did not politely vanish with the signature. It adjusted its hat and continued negotiating. Historians still argue over how to measure coffee's role in Brazil's political development. Some emphasize the power of regional elites and the influence of coffee planters in shaping state policy, infrastructure, credit, and labor arrangements. Others warn against making coffee the single explanation for a complex nation with mining, sugar, cattle, urban growth, military politics, and many regional economies. The safer truth is layered. Coffee did not explain everything, but in certain regions and periods, it explained a great deal. It was not the whole house, but it held up several noisy rooms. You stand near a warehouse as evening approaches. The day's heat begins to loosen. Workers' voices lower. A child runs past a doorway and is called back. Beans dry in the fading light. The smell is warm, dusty, and faintly sweet. A breeze moves through the yard, touching your damp skin with relief. In the distance, hills darken into soft blue shapes. Coffee's scale in Brazil changes the drink's global meaning. It becomes more available, more affordable, more ordinary. The growing middle classes of distant cities can drink it daily because entire landscapes have been reorganized around supply. What feels like a simple morning habit may depend on credit systems, port fees, labour migrations, deforestation, weather, prices, and political alliances. The cup becomes common precisely because the machinery behind it becomes enormous. You pick up a single dried bean from the yard. It is light, hard, and plain. Nothing about it shows railroads, estates, slavery, abolition, immigration, debt, ambition, or export statistics. It keeps its secrets well. Only the surrounding world gives it away. Night settles over the fazenda. Frogs call from wet ground. The last carts stand quiet. Smoke from cooking fires drifts low and blue. The soil beneath you releases the heat it stored all day. Coffee shrubs fade into rows of shadow, patient and silent, while the empire built around them keeps counting, shipping, planting, borrowing, and dreaming in the dark. You stand on a dock where the world has been packed into crates. The morning is grey, and the harbour water moves with a thick, oily patience against the pilings. Men haul sacks from wagons to warehouses, their boots striking wet planks with hollow thuds. The air smells of salt, coal smoke, damp rope, coffee dust, tea chests, sugar barrels, spices, and the sour breath of ships that have crossed too many miles without apology. This is coffee in the age of empires, when one cup can contain half a map and far too many governments. You watch a clerk mark symbols on a ledger. His pen scratches across paper, neat and merciless. Each line records origin, weight, grade, destination, price, insurance, and duty. The beans themselves sit quietly in coarse bags, but around them swirls an entire imperial system colonies, shipping firms, banks, brokers, customs offices, naval power, plantation law, and advertising. Coffee is no longer simply a drink that travels. It is a commodity disciplined by paperwork. Across the 18th and 19th centuries, European empires helped expand coffee cultivation and consumptions on a global scale. Dutch power shaped coffee production in Java. French colonial interests pushed coffee across Caribbean and Indian Ocean territories. British consumers drank coffee alongside tea within a vast imperial marketplace, even if tea would dominate many British habits. Spanish and Portuguese colonial worlds carried coffee through Latin America. Local conditions differed, but the pattern is clear. Imperial systems turned coffee into a crop of revenue, labour control, and strategic trade. You step into a warehouse where sacks rise in dim towers, dust floats in the shafts of light, the burlap is rough under your fingers, and when you press it, the beans shift with a dry, whispering sound. A worker nearby coughs. His hands are pale with powder from handling cargo. Above, pulleys creak. A rat, clearly confident in its maritime rights, disappears between crates. The warehouse feels like a cathedral of commerce, though the prayers here are mostly invoices. Coffee's imperial life is not only about plantations, it is also about taste. European consumers learn to desire beans from particular places, and merchants learn to sell those origins as identity. Java becomes a name on bags and menus. Mocha becomes an old prestige word. Bourbon, Martinique, Ceylon, Jamaica, Suriname, Brazil, and many other places become part of a widening vocabulary of flavour and supply. The empire enters the tongue as geography disguised as pleasure. A quirky tidbit belongs to the language of coffee itself. The word Java becomes a casual nickname for coffee in English because of the Dutch colonial production on the island of Java. So when someone later says they need a cup of Java, they are unknowingly echoing colonial agriculture, trade routes, and the stubborn human habit of turning complicated histories into cute little words. It is efficient, yes. Innocent, not entirely. You enter a European dining room where coffee is served after a meal. The walls are papered in a fashionable pattern. A fire glows low. Porcelain cups sit on saucers thin enough to show status by making everyone afraid to drop them. The coffee arrives with sugar, perhaps cream, perhaps little sweets. It smells refined, warm, and polite. People discuss opera, politics, investments, and the health of relatives they only partly like. In this setting, coffee appears as comfort and civilization, yet the cup has travelled through violence, disease, forced labour, debt, and extraction. The sugar beside it may carry an equally bitter story. The porcelain may come through another chain of trade, the mahogany table, another. Empire is skilled at making distant labour appear as domestic elegance. It lays a white cloth over the world and calls the result tasteful. You take the cup. It warms your palm. The first sip is smooth, sweetened, and fragrant. It would be easy to enjoy it without thinking. That ease is part of the system. Commodities become powerful when they detach pleasure from origin. Coffee invites intimacy, but empire often hides the hands that brought it close. In the Dutch East Indies, especially Java, coffee production became tied to coercive systems. Under different arrangements over time, local farmers were compelled to grow coffee for colonial benefit. The Dutch profited heavily from controlled production and export. Later, the cultivation system in the 19th century forced peasants in parts of Java to devote land and labour to export crops, including coffee, though its exact local effects varied. Coffee, in this world, was not merely planted, it was commanded. You walk through a Javanese landscape in heavy humidity. Hills rise green under a pearl-coloured sky. The air smells of wet leaves, smoke, clove, mud, and ripening fruit. Farmers move along paths between fields and coffee shrubs, their feet sinking slightly into damp soil. A colonial official's residence stands apart, raised and orderly, with shutters, ledgers, and a veranda positioned to turn oversight into architecture. Rain begins softly, then thickens until leaves drum with water. The coffee plants drink, the people work. Historians still debate how to balance the story of imperial coffee between global demand and local agency. Colonial power was real, often harsh, and deeply shaping. Yet local growers, traders, labourers, and communities also adapted, resisted, negotiated, hid crops, changed practices, and used coffee markets in their own ways when possible. To describe empire only from the top is to repeat its arrogance. To ignore coercion is worse. The truth lies in the uneasy ground where power presses down and people still maneuver beneath it. Coffee also becomes a tool of imperial imagination. Advertisements and travel writing present plantations as exotic, orderly, and picturesque. They show green hills, smiling workers, elegant planters, and tropical abundance. They rarely show hunger, punishment, debt, disease, or exhausted bodies. The empire does not simply move goods. It edits stories. It teaches consumers what not to see. You pass a shop window in a growing industrial city. Tins, packets, and sacks are arranged with care. Labels promise purity, strength, freshness, and origin. A painted image shows a distant landscape in warm colours. Inside, customers ask for beans by name, weighing price against prestige. The shop smells wonderful roasted coffee, paper, wood, spices, and a faint trace of chocolate. Pleasure is real, so is the history that made it purchasable. By evening, the harbour grows darker. Lamps appear along the quay, their reflections trembling in black water. Another ship is being loaded, another ledger closes, another table somewhere waits for coffee after dinner. You feel the chill of damp air through your coat, the grit of coffee dust on your fingers, the ache in your shoulders from simply watching labour repeat itself. Coffee in the age of empires becomes global in the deepest sense. It links mountain farms to colonial offices, enslaved and coerced workers to polite drawing rooms, botanical science to profit, naval routes to breakfast habits, and advertising dreams to real landscapes. It becomes ordinary by becoming enormous. You breathe in the harbour, smell one more time, salt, smoke, rope, beans, and rain. The sacks sit in the lamplight like sleeping animals. They look still, but inside them the world is moving. You stand at the edge of a military camp just before dawn, where the world is grey, cold, and reluctant to begin. Canvas tents sag with dew. Mud grips the paths between them. Horses stamp and snort in the half-light, their breath rising pale into the air. Somewhere, a cook fire struggles to wake under damp wood, sending up smoke that smells of ash, wet bark, and something almost edible if you're generous. Very generous. Desperation has always improved camp cuisine. A tin cup is placed in your hands. It is dented, hot on one side, cold on the other, and blackened near the rim. Inside is coffee, rough, dark, and bitter enough to make your face consider resigning. You drink anyway. Of course you do. In a camp, comfort does not need to be elegant. It only needs to arrive warm. Coffee becomes a soldier's companion because war is exhausting in ways that polite histories often flatten. There is marching, waiting, digging, carrying, freezing, sweating, listening, fearing, and waking before the body has agreed to be awake. Sleep comes badly. Food comes late. Orders come at inconvenient moments, because apparently no commander has ever asked fatigue for its schedule. A drink that sharpens the senses and warms the hands can feel like mercy. One mainstream historical fact is clear coffee became an important military ration in several modern armies, especially in the United States during the 19th century. During the American Civil War, Union soldiers were issued coffee as part of their rations, and many prized it deeply. They roasted beans, ground them, boiled them in tin cups or pots, and drank it in camps, on marches, and near battle lines. For many soldiers, coffee was not a luxury. It was fuel, habit, medicine, and morale. You walk between tents as men stir under blankets. The ground is slick beneath your boots. A soldier kneels beside a small fire, feeding it twigs with careful fingers. Another crushes coffee beans with the butt of a rifle, using whatever surface he can find. The sound is dull, rhythmic, almost domestic. If you ignore the mud, weapons, lice, and general collapse of comfort, beans crack under metal, water boils, grounds swirl in the cup. Nobody complains much about method. In war, standards become flexible little creatures. The smell rises, and the camp changes. Coffee drifts through canvas lanes, mingling with smoke, wool, leather, damp earth, and unwashed bodies. Men lift their heads. Some curse softly. Some joke. Some stare into the fire as if it contains home. A cup passes from hand to hand. Tin touches tin. The small sounds matter: a spoon tapping, a pot lid rattling, the hiss when water spills onto coals. Coffee offers one of the few private moments in a life ruled by orders. You can be counted, marched, drilled, inspected, and sent where someone else decides. But for a few minutes you hold your own cup. You breathe steam into your face. You feel warmth enter fingers stiff from cold. You taste bitterness that belongs to you. It is not freedom, exactly. But it is a small room inside the body where the world pauses. A quirky tidbit from the American Civil War is that some Sharps carbines were manufactured with a coffee grinder built into the stock, though such weapons were uncommon and not the everyday standard. Still, the idea is wonderfully strange. A firearm that acknowledges soldiers need caffeine almost as much as ammunition. It feels like an invention produced by someone who understood military life with alarming clarity. The message is practical and bleakly funny. Defend the line. Grind the beans. Continue. Coffee also marks difference between armies. In the Civil War, Union access to coffee was generally better because of stronger supply networks and control of imports, while Confederate soldiers often faced shortages and used substitutes such as roasted corn, rye, peanuts, sweet potatoes, chicory, acorns, or whatever else could be persuaded to become brown in a pan. Some substitutes may have been tolerable. Others were acts of optimism against the tongue. Imagine lifting a cup of roasted acorn water and whispering close enough, while your soul quietly disagrees. You step into a winter camp where cold enters everything. Blankets smell of damp wool and smoke. Fingers are cracked. Boots are stiff. A soldier writes a letter by firelight, his paper balanced on a box. Beside him, coffee cools in a tin cup, leaving a dark ring. He writes of health, weather, longing, boredom, and perhaps not too much fear, because families at home are already carrying enough. The coffee keeps him awake long enough to finish the sentence. Its steam fogs the air between memory and mud. Historians still argue about how much coffee affected military performance compared with other factors such as supply, discipline, leadership, food, transport, training, and morale. It would be silly to say coffee won wars, although many tired soldiers might have voted for that interpretation at dawn. What scholars can say more carefully is that coffee mattered as a ration because it supported alertness, routine, warmth, and psychological endurance. Armies are built from logistics, but they survive day by day through habits. Coffee travels in military packs, wagons, tins, sacks, and kettles. It crosses fields, rivers, mountain roads, desert camps, and muddy trenches. In later wars, it appears in rations in new forms. Instant coffee becomes especially useful because it is light, stable, and quick to prepare. Soldiers may grumble about quality, because grumbling is a military language nearly as universal as marching, but they drink it anyway. A poor cup is often better than no cup, and war lowers the poetry of taste. You hear the camp becoming fully awake. Orders are called, horses are harnessed, metal buckles clink, wheels turn in mud, men gulp the last mouthfuls, too hot, too bitter, too necessary. Some tuck beans into pockets, some rinse cups with a splash of water that is not really enough. The fires are kicked down, smoke trails low over the ground. The cup in your hands is empty now, but its warmth lingers in your palms. Around you, The camp begins to move toward another day of uncertainty. Coffee has not made the world safe. It has not removed fear, cold, hunger, or homesickness. It has simply given tired people a dark, hot companion, one that says, without sentiment, stay awake a little longer. You step into a city morning where factory whistles cut through the fog and windows begin to glow one by one. The air smells of coal smoke, damp brick, bread from early ovens, horse manure in the street, and coffee rising from kitchens where tired hands are already moving. The world is becoming louder, faster, and more scheduled. Time no longer feels like sunrise and sunset alone. It ticks from clocks, bells, shifts, timetables, office hours, and the nervous little face of a pocket watch. Coffee fits this new rhythm almost too well. You enter a modest kitchen before work. The floorboards are cold beneath your feet. A kettle trembles on the stove. The room is small, with a table worn pale at the corners, a chipped cup, a loaf wrapped in cloth, and a coat hanging near the door. Someone grinds roasted beans in a hand mill, turning the handle with sleepy determination. The burrs crush the beans with a low rasping sound, steady and intimate. The smell fills the room, warm, bitter, and comforting, pushing back the chill better than the stove does. The mainstream fact is clear during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Coffee became increasingly woven into daily life for workers, clerks, professionals, and households across many parts of Europe and the Americas. As global production expanded and prices changed, coffee became more accessible to broader populations. It moved from elite curiosity and public coffeehouse habit into kitchens, workplaces, diners, boarding houses, offices, and factory routines. Coffee became ordinary, and ordinary is sometimes the most powerful transformation of all. You hold a cup between both hands. It is not porcelain in a grand café. It is thick ceramic, slightly cracked near the handle, warm against your fingers. The coffee is boiled a little too long, maybe stretched with chicory or roasted grain if money is tight. It is bitter, but it does what is asked. It wakes the body. It gives shape to morning. It lets a person step from private sleep into public labour with a little more courage. Industrial life makes wakefulness valuable in new ways. Factory shifts begin early. Clerks copy documents for long hours. Railway workers keep schedules. Dock hands load cargo before dawn. Seamstresses sew by weak light. Shopkeepers stand all day. Teachers, nurses, printers, miners, and office workers rely on small rituals to keep moving. Coffee becomes less a luxury than a tool, a legal stimulant with a pleasant smell and very persuasive marketing. Society looks at exhaustion and says, "Have you tried being productive with a beverage typical?" You walk into a factory break room, though it may not yet be called that. The walls are darkened by smoke and dust. A pot sits near a stove, thick with grounds. Workers gather briefly, sleeves rolled, hands rough, faces pale under grime. The air hums with machinery beyond the door, a constant iron pounding that you feel through the soles of your shoes. The coffee is poured quickly, cups clatter. Someone makes a joke too dry to survive outside this room. Someone else says nothing at all, just drinks and closes his eyes for 3 seconds. A quirky tidbit belongs to the old workplace coffee pot, especially in offices and workshops where coffee simmered for hours until it became less a drink and more a warning. Long before sleek machines and careful brewing temperatures, many people drank coffee that had been boiled, reheated, neglected, and resurrected with heroic disregard for flavour. It tasted burnt, metallic, and slightly accusatory. And still, people return to it. Habit is a powerful editor of standards. Coffee also becomes tied to respectability. Unlike alcohol, it can be consumed during the working day without obvious impairment. Temperance movements in the 19th century often promoted coffee as an alternative to spirits, beer and gin. Coffee taverns and temperance cafés appeared in some places, offering warmth, company, and food without alcohol. The idea was moral, practical, and a little hopeful. Give people somewhere to gather that does not end with everyone singing badly at midnight. You sit in one such room. The air smells of coffee, soup, damp coats, soap, and polished wood. The tables are plain. The cups are sturdy. Posters on the wall encourage sobriety, thrift, and self-improvement, which is a lot to ask from someone holding a lukewarm beverage after a 12-hour shift. Yet the space matters. It offers shelter, conversation, and a safer public habit. Coffee becomes part of reform, discipline, and the dream of an orderly working life. Historians still argue about how strongly coffee changed labour productivity compared with broader forces such as mechanization, wages, urbanization, electric lighting, and factory discipline. It would be too simple to say coffee powered industrial capitalism by itself. Machines, coal, laws, migration, and finance did plenty of heavy lifting. But coffee clearly supported the culture of punctuality, alertness, and repeated daily effort. It gave individuals a ritual for managing the demands that larger systems placed upon them. You move into an early office, where clerks sit at high desks under gaslight or electric bulbs. Paper stacks rise like pale little hills. Ink smells sharp. Wool suits trap heat. A clock ticks with the moral superiority of an object never asked to feel tired. On a side table, a pot of coffee waits. The officers discovered that mental labour also consumes the body. Numbers blur. Letters swim. Decisions grow dull. Coffee returns the edge, or at least the illusion of one, which can be almost as useful until the mistakes arrive. At home, coffee marks hospitality, a neighbour visits, and a pot is prepared. A traveller arrives cold, and coffee is offered. Families gather around breakfast. A widow stretches beans carefully through the week. A boarding house serves coffee to strangers seated elbow to elbow. In each setting, coffee does quiet social work. It says welcome, begin, continue, endure, sit with me. You feel the atmosphere of these everyday cups. The spoon against enamel, the scrape of a chair, the warmth rising into the face, the smell clinging to curtains and coats, the small silence after the first sip, when the body accepts that the day has won and sleep has lost. Coffee becomes less dramatic than revolution, and less grand than empire, but more intimate. It enters repetition. It becomes the companion of ordinary time. By evening, the factory whistle sounds again. Workers spill into streets under a darkening sky. Office lamps go out. Kitchens glow somewhere. Another pot is set for the morning, measured with care or with habit too deep to need measuring. Coffee is now built into the day like a hinge. It opens the morning. It steadies the afternoon. It makes fatigue negotiable. You stand in the doorway of a small kitchen as night settles against the window. The cup is empty. The grounds rest at the bottom, dark and quiet. Outside, the city keeps ticking. Inside, the smell of coffee lingers in the warm air, patient, domestic, and ready to begin again. You step into the 20th century and everything seems to be in a hurry. Trains run by the clock. Telephones ring with small metallic urgency. Cars cough and rattle through streets that still remember horses. Electric signs flicker above shop fronts. Kitchens fill with new tins, jars, packets, and promises. The air smells of coal smoke, hot metal, soap flakes, fried breakfast, and coffee that no longer asks to be slowly roasted, ground, and coaxed into being. It has learned a new trick. It can dissolve. Instant coffee arrives as one of modern life's most revealing inventions. You stand in a kitchen where morning light falls across a linoleum floor. A kettle hums on the stove. A glass jar waits on the table, filled with brown crystals that look like something between soil and medicine. A spoon dips in. The crystals click softly against enamel. Hot water pours, and the coffee darkens at once, blooming into steam without the rasp of a grinder or the patience of a pot. It smells familiar, but thinner, sharper, slightly cooked. The cup is ready almost before the sleepy mind has finished objecting to existence. One mainstream historical fact is clear instant coffee, developed through several inventions and commercial efforts in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, then became especially prominent during wartime and mass consumer culture. Brands refined methods of drying brewed coffee into soluble powder or crystals, making coffee faster to prepare, easier to transport, and longer lasting. It suited armies, offices, factories, travellers, and households shaped by speed. Coffee had once gathered people around ritual. Now it could be made by stirring. You hold the cup, the ceramic is smooth, the handle warm, the taste direct and blunt. It does not have the rounded depth of freshly ground beans. It has another quality: convenience. That word may sound dull, but modern history bows to it constantly. Convenience changes kitchens, shopping, labour, advertising, and even taste. People often learn to prefer what fits their lives. When time becomes scarce, as speed begins to taste like relief, during the First and Second World Wars, instant coffee became especially useful for soldiers. It was light, portable, and simple to prepare under difficult conditions. A packet or tin could travel in a ration kit. Hot water, when available, could turn it into warmth, alertness, and something resembling home in muddy camps, naval ships, airfields, barracks, and field kitchens. Instant coffee offered caffeine without equipment. Not elegance, certainly. But war has never been known for its gentle brewing standards. A quirky tidbit from this world is that some soldiers called instant coffee by brand names so often that the brand became almost a synonym for the drink itself. Complaints about flavour existed, naturally, because even under bombardment the human tongue maintains opinions, yet soldiers still treasured it. There is something quietly funny and sad about a man grumbling over bad coffee while guarding it like treasure. Standards and gratitude can sit in the same tin cup. You move into a mid-century office, where fluorescent lights hum overhead and typewriters strike paper with a dry, insect-like clatter. Desks line the room, phones ring, filing cabinets stand like grey monuments to paperwork. Near the wall sits a coffee station jar, kettle, cups, sugar, powdered creamer, spoons, and a little drift of spilled crystals no one claims responsibility for. The smell is warm, stale, and social. People gather for a minute, not long enough to be accused of idleness, but long enough to breathe. Coffee breaks become part of modern work culture. In many workplaces, a pause for coffee offers not only caffeine but informal conversation, complaint, planning, and tiny acts of escape. The break is brief, but psychologically large. You can hear it in the sounds chair legs scraping back, water boiling, spoons clinking, someone sighing with theatrical despair, someone else saying they cannot possibly continue, then continuing immediately. Historians still argue whether instant coffee represents democratization, decline, adaptation, or all three wearing the same sensible shoes. Some see it as triumph of food technology, making coffee affordable and accessible to millions. Others view it as a loss of craft, flavour, and connection to origin. Both views carry truth. Instant coffee broadens the habit while flattening the experience. It turns coffee into a product that can be stored, shipped, advertised, rationed, and prepared almost anywhere. It makes the cup less local and more industrial. Advertising wraps instant coffee in modern dreams. Posters and magazine pages show smiling families, efficient kitchens, cheerful wives, productive workers, and guests impressed by effortless hospitality. The message is simple. Good living should be quick, clean, and reliable. A jar on the shelf becomes a symbol of progress. No mess, no grounds, no waiting. Just add hot water, as if life itself might become that manageable if stirred properly. Very optimistic, deeply suspicious. You sit at a diner counter where coffee comes not from crystals but from an industrial machine. Yet the same modern spirit rules. Chrome shines under bright lights. Cups are thick and white. The waitress moves with a pot in one hand, refilling mugs before anyone fully asks. The air smells of frying eggs, bacon, toast, cigarette smoke, sugar, and brewed coffee held hot for too long. A neon sign buzzes in the window. Someone reads a newspaper. Someone drives all night and stops only because the body has begun writing threats. The 20th century stretches coffee across speed itself. Vending machines appear in stations, offices, schools, and hospitals. Canned coffee emerges in some markets. Percolators bubble on counters. Electric drip machines promise consistency. Airports, highways, factories, late-night study halls, and hospital corridors all become coffee territories. The drink follows tired people wherever modern systems keep the lights on. You touch the side of a vending machine cup. It is thin, too hot, and slightly flimsy. The coffee inside smells metallic and sweet from powdered additions. It is not romantic, yet at 3 a.m. under buzzing lights, it may feel like rescue. That is coffee's strange loyalty. It appears in beautiful rooms and ugly corridors alike. It does not require the moment to be noble. By night, you return to the kitchen with the glass jar. The house is quiet except for the refrigerator's soft hum and the kettle beginning to stir. Outside, streetlights make pale circles on the pavement. You spoon crystals into a cup and watch them vanish under hot water. The speed still feels faintly magical, even if the taste carries a little compromise. Modern life has asked coffee to become faster, cheaper, lighter, and more obedient. Coffee has agreed, though perhaps with a sigh. Steam rises, you breathe it in. The century rushes around the cup ember for one small moment. Even instant comfort asks you to pause. You enter a narrow street where evening has polished the pavement and the windows glow with amber light. Somewhere inside a café, steam hisses with the drama of a small train. Cups strike saucers, a grinder growls, then falls silent. The air smells of roasted beans, hot milk, rain on stone, cigarette smoke, perfume, and the sharp metallic scent of machinery kept very busy. Coffee is no longer merely a drink for waking up. It is becoming style, performance, and identity. You push open the door of an espresso bar. The room is small enough to make strangers seem temporarily related. People stand at the counter rather than settling in for a long visit. Coats brush together, coins click against marble. A barista moves behind the machine with fast, practiced hands. There is a rhythm to the place grind, dose, tamp, lock, pull, pour, serve. The espresso machine breathes and sighs like a polished brass animal. Steam erupts from the wand with a soft scream, and milk turns glossy in a metal pitcher. Espresso, in its modern form, grows from Italian innovations in coffee brewing during the late 19th and 20th centuries. Machines use pressure to force hot water through finely ground coffee, producing a concentrated drink quickly. The method suited urban life beautifully. It was fast, intense, social, and theatrical. Instead of waiting beside a pot, you could step to a counter, drink a small cup in moments, exchange a few words, and return to the street feeling slightly more prepared to confront existence, or at least public transportation. You hold the tiny cup. It is heavy for its size, white and warm, with a thick rim. The espresso inside is dark brown, crowned with creamer, that delicate foam formed by pressure, oils, gases, and the fragile hope of every barista who has ever watched a shot run too quickly. You sip. The taste is concentrated, bitter, sweet, smoky, sharp, and brief. It does not spread slowly like a large mug. It flashes. Then it leaves warmth in your chest and a bright line in the mind. A quirky tidbit belongs to the word espresso itself. It's often connected with speed and pressure, but also with the idea of a cup made expressly for the customer. One small drink, prepared to order, just for you. Very flattering, really. Even when the person behind the counter is moving so quickly that your individuality seems to last about 12 seconds. In Italy, the espresso bar becomes a daily stage. Morning workers stop for a quick shot. Friends meet standing up. Office clerks pause between tasks. Older men linger just long enough to comment on football, politics, weather, and the decline of manners, all ancient pillars of civilization. The counter is democratic in posture, though not always in reality. People stand side by side, share noise and steam, then scatter. The atmosphere has its own music. Porcelain taps marble. A cash register snaps open. The grinder rattles. Milk foams with a wet roar. Chairs scrape near the wall. Outside, scooters pass, leaving a faint smell of petrol in the damp street. Inside, the roasted scent is deeper, warmer, almost protective. You can feel heat from the machine on your face. The counter under your fingertips is cool and slightly sticky from sugar grains. Espresso culture travels, changes, and gathers meanings. In some cities, cafés become places of youth, art, politics, and rebellion. In post-war Europe, espresso bars suggest modernity, speed, urban sophistication, and a certain stylish impatience. In Britain during the 1950s and 1960s, espresso bars attract teenagers, musicians, artists, immigrants, and night wanderers. They glow late, play music, and offer a different mood from pubs or old tea rooms. Coffee becomes connected not only with alertness, but with coolness. The cup acquires sunglasses, metaphorically speaking, and becomes unbearable for a few years. As cool things often do, you settle into a cafe where the lights are low and jazz drifts from a speaker. The bass moves softly through the floor. Smoke curls toward the ceiling. A young poet writes in a notebook with intense suffering over a perfectly normal cappuccino. Someone in dark clothes leans against the wall and says very little, which everyone interprets as depth. Coffee gives these scenes a prop and a pulse. It lets people linger without the heavy blur of alcohol. It permits conversation to sharpen, music to stretch, and identity to be performed one sip at a time. Historians still debate how much espresso culture changed social life by itself, and how much it simply rode larger waves of urbanization, youth culture, migration, consumer design, and post-war prosperity. The cafe did not invent rebellion. It did not invent style. It offered a brightly lit counter where both could pose. Still, spaces matter. A young person needs somewhere to go. A writer needs a table. A musician needs a room where someone might listen. Coffee supplies the pretext. Milk drinks add another layer. Cappuccino, cafe latte, macchiato, and other forms turn espresso into texture. Hot milk softens bitterness. Foam becomes comfort. Chocolate dust appears, because apparently even seriousness needs decoration. The hiss of steaming milk becomes one of the defining sounds of modern coffee culture. You feel the cup between your palms, larger now, its surface pale and silky. The smell is sweet, warm, and slightly nutty. The first sip leaves foam on your lip, which is humbling. No one remains mysterious with a milk moustache for long. Espresso also teaches people to watch coffee being made. The machine sits in public view. Preparation becomes craft, speed, and performance. Customers learn to judge creamer, timing, grind, temperature, and technique, or at least to pretend with quiet confidence. A barista becomes more than a server. The role carries skill, memory, rhythm, and sometimes the patience of a saint dealing with people who say extra dry as if issuing a royal decree. You step back into the street, where night has deepened and cafe lights spill onto wet pavement. The smell of espresso clings to your coat. Behind you, the machine keeps breathing. Another cup is pulled. Another person pauses at the counter, drinks quickly, and returns to the city brighter than before. Coffee has learned to be fast without being merely convenient. It has become dramatic, stylish, concentrated, and social in a new key. Steam, chrome, music, youth, impatience, elegance, and mild pretension all gather around the tiny cup. And somehow, in that brief dark sip, the modern cafe discovers a whole new way to stay awake. You walk into a modern cafe where the lights are soft, the tables are pale wood, and the air smells like roasted nuts, warm pastry, citrus peel, and rain drying on coats. A grinder starts behind the counter with a sudden growl, then settles into a fine mechanical purr. Steam rises from a kettle with a narrow curved spout. On the wall, a chalkboard lists names that sound less like menu items and more like small journeys. Ethiopia Yirgachef, Colombia Huila, Guatemala Antigua, Kenya Nyeri, Sumatra Mandeling. Coffee has become specific. You stand before shelves lined with bags in matte colours, each stamped with a farm, a region, an altitude, a process, a roast date, and tasting notes. Blueberry, brown sugar, bergamot, red apple, dark chocolate, jasmine. Someone has written stone fruit with absolute seriousness. You may wonder quietly whether the stones are included. They are not. Probably this is the world of specialty coffee, where the old anonymous bean becomes a named origin, a story, a score, and sometimes a moral promise. During the late 20th and early 21st centuries, coffee culture in many countries shifted toward higher quality beans, lighter roasts, careful brewing, direct trade relationships, barista training, and attention to origin. The movement did not erase mass-market coffee. instant coffee, or diner refills. Those still carry on bravely. But specialty coffee created a new language of taste and value. You take a seat near the bar. The table is smooth beneath your fingers, slightly cool. A barista weighs beans on a small digital scale. The beans click softly into a grinder. The grounds fall into a paper filter, releasing a fragrance brighter than the dark roast you may expect. Hot water pours in slow circles. The grounds swell, bubble, and breathe. This first bloom smells floral, fruity, and alive, as if the cup is remembering the farm more clearly than the roaster's fire. One mainstream historical fact is essential here. Specialty coffee emphasizes quality throughout the chain. From cultivation and harvesting to processing, roasting, brewing, and tasting, organizations, competitions, cupping protocols, and quality grading systems help define and promote this approach. Coffee is evaluated for aroma, acidity, body, sweetness, balance, aftertaste, and defects. The casual cup becomes a studied experience, which is delightful, useful, and occasionally a little exhausting before breakfast. You lift the finished cup. It is served black. No sugar, no milk, no disguise. The ceramic is thin and warm. You sip. At first you taste brightness, almost like citrus. Then sweetness, soft and round. Then a dry finish, like cocoa or tea. It is coffee, unmistakably. But it does not taste like the burnt office pot that once stared into the abyss and came back with management advice. This cup feels transparent. You can imagine sunlight, rain, altitude, soil, fruit, fermentation, and careful hands. The modern specialty movement also asks drinkers to think about farmers. Coffee grows mostly in tropical regions, often in countries where producers face price instability, climate risk, unequal bargaining power, pests, disease, and limited access to capital. Meanwhile, the finished drink may sell for high prices in wealthy cities. That tension makes ethics central to the conversation. Fair trade, direct trade, relationship coffee, organic certification, shade-grown labels, and sustainability claims all attempt, in different ways, to answer the uncomfortable question who benefits from the cup. A quirky tidbit lives inside the tasting room. Professional coffee tasters, called cuppers, often slurp a coffee loudly from spoons to spray it across the palate and nose. It is considered proper technique. So yes, in a formal setting, the person making the most dramatic soup noise may be the expert. Civilization is full of surprises. You enter a cupping session. Bowls of ground coffee sit in a row. Hot water is poured over each one. A crust forms on the surface, trapping aroma. After a few minutes, the crust is broken with a spoon, and fragrance bursts upward. Berries, caramel, flowers, herbs, spice, earth. People lean in, noses close to the bowls, faces thoughtful. The room becomes quiet except for spoons, sniffing, and later, spectacular slurping. It would be ridiculous if it were not also precise. Historians and economists still argue whether specialty coffee and ethical labelling truly transform the lives of producers, or whether they sometimes offer consumers a comforting story, while deeper inequalities remain. Some farmers gain better prices, recognition, and relationships through quality-focused markets. Others remain vulnerable to volatile commodity prices, certification costs, climate stress, and middlemen. A beautiful label can reveal origin, but it can also simplify it. Knowing the farm name is meaningful. It is not the same as solving the farm's problems. You feel this complexity in the cafe's calm atmosphere. A laptop glows on one table. A couple shares a pastry. Someone photographs a latte with the solemn focus of an archivist preserving a minor foam event. The music is low, warm, and unobtrusive. Everything appears gentle, yet the cup connects to rural labour, global markets, land rights, water use, migration, crop disease, and warming temperatures. Coffee remains intimate and planetary at once. Climate change has become one of the great concerns of modern coffee. Arabica coffee is sensitive to temperature, rainfall patterns, pests, and disease. As growing conditions shift, some traditional regions may become less suitable. While farmers may need to move crops higher, change varieties, invest in shade, or adapt processing methods. The aroma in your cup feels delicate because, in truth, the plant is delicate too. Its future is not guaranteed simply because the cafe has excellent lighting. New processing methods add another layer of fascination. Washed coffees may taste clean and bright. Natural processed coffees dried in the fruit can taste fruity, heavy, or wild. Honey processes leave some sticky fruit mucilage on the bean during drying, creating sweetness and texture. Experimental fermentations can produce flavors that seem almost like wine, tropical fruit, or candy. Some are beautiful, some are confusing. Some make you wonder whether the coffee is flirting with kombucha. You watch the barista prepare another brew, this time with a glass dripper. Water spirals slowly. The smell rises in waves. The touch of the warm cup against your palms brings the whole history down into one quiet moment. The named origin on the bag, the careful roast, the farmer's work, the buyer's promise, the climate risk, the tasting note, the price, the pleasure, all gather here. Specialty coffee asks you to pay attention. That is its deepest change. Not merely to drink for wakefulness, not merely to consume a habit, but to notice difference. One cup can be floral, another earthy, one soft, another sharp, one expensive because it is rare, another expensive because the rent is clearly too high. But let us not ruin the mood. Outside, rain begins again, tapping the window in soft, irregular beats. Inside, the grinder wakes, the kettle sings, and a fresh cup is placed on the counter. Coffee has become global taste, moral puzzle, craft performance, agricultural risk, and personal ritual. You breathe in the steam, and the world inside it is no longer anonymous. You sit in a quiet room with a cup beside you, and the world feels very far away. The light is low. The window is dark. Somewhere outside, a car passes with a soft rush of tires on pavement, then fades into silence. The cup warms the table beneath it. Steam rises in slow threads, carrying the smell of roasted beans, faint sweetness, smoke, earth, and something almost floral if you breathe gently enough. This is coffee in the present tense ordinary, ancient, complicated, comforting. You lift the cup with both hands. The ceramic touches your palms, smooth and warm. The first sip is familiar, but now the familiarity is crowded with ghosts. Mountain forests, night prayers, harbours, courtrooms, coffeehouses, plantations, ships, soldiers, factories, diners, espresso bars, farms with names printed on careful labels. Every cup is small, yet it has room for centuries. History is rude like that. It will fit inside your breakfast and wait until you're awake enough to notice. One mainstream historical fact is plain coffee is now one of the world's most widely consumed beverages, grown across tropical regions and consumed in nearly every kind of society. From rural homes to global chains, roadside stalls, office kitchens, airports, luxury cafes, and kitchen counters at unreasonable hours. It has become a daily ritual for hundreds of millions of people. The form changes, the habit remains. You look at the surface of the drink. It reflects a dim oval of light. If there is milk, it moves in pale clouds. If it is black, it holds the room like a tiny dark mirror. The spoon rests nearby, cool against the saucer. The sound of it tapping once against ceramic is small enough to be tender. Coffee's modern life is full of contradictions. It can be cheap and expensive, rushed and ceremonial, solitary and social, industrial and artisanal. It can come from a vending machine in a hospital corridor at 3 fair, tasting faintly of cardboard and courage. It can come from a careful pour-over in a cafe where someone has weighed the water with the moral seriousness of a jeweller. It can be instant crystals in a chipped mug, espresso in a porcelain cup, iced coffee sweating in plastic, or a pot shared at a family table while someone says they are not fully human yet, which is honest, if medically vague. A quirky tidbit of the present age is that coffee has become a language of personality. People joke about their identities through it: black coffee for severity, lattes for comfort, cold brew for sleek ambition, espresso for drama, decaf for diplomacy, pumpkin spice for seasonal courage in a sweater. None of these categories are fair, of course, but humans love turning beverages into tiny autobiographies. It is cheaper than therapy, though not always by much. The room around you softens. You hear the hum of an appliance, the faint settling of walls, perhaps rain touching the glass. Coffee's smell moves gently through the air, no longer a signal of empire or argument, simply the fragrance of pause. Yet even here, in this private calm, the drink remains connected to soil, weather, labour, trade, and choice. Farmers still tend coffee plants on steep hillsides and in shaded valleys. Pickers still judge cherries by colour and ripeness. Processors still wash, ferment, dry, hull, sort, and bag. Roasters still listen for the crack of beans under heat. Baristas still dial in grind size while trying not to look personally betrayed by humidity. Consumers still ask for comfort, energy, flavour, identity, and occasionally oat milk with the seriousness of a treaty negotiation. Historians still argue whether coffee should be understood mainly as a stimulant that shaped public thought, a commodity that expanded empire, a social ritual that built communities, or a labour story that reveals global inequality. The answer refuses to sit politely in one chair. Coffee is all of these. It sharpened conversation, supported devotion, fed markets, hid exploitation, warmed soldiers, disciplined workers, inspired artists, and comforted the tired. To reduce it to one meaning would be convenient, and history rarely rewards convenience. You hold the cup closer, the heat touches your face, the smell is darker now, as the drink cools. You can taste bitterness along the edge of the tongue, then a softer body beneath it. Coffee teaches a strange lesson about bitterness. Bitterness is not always rejection. Sometimes it is depth. Sometimes it is memory. Sometimes it is what keeps sweetness from becoming too easy. The modern coffee world also faces fragile questions. Climate shifts threaten growing regions. Farmers struggle with uncertain prices. Consumers ask for ethical sourcing, yet often know only the polished front of the chain. Big companies sell convenience and consistency. Small cafés sell craft and intimacy. Both depend on the same delicate plant, the same red cherries, the same human labour. The future of coffee may require new varieties, fairer markets, better environmental care, and a more honest relationship between the person who grows and the person who drinks. But for now, the cup is here. You rest your hand beside it and feel the table's quiet firmness. The room has grown still enough that even your breathing seems audible. Coffee has carried revolutions, but it has also carried mornings like this one. It has belonged to poets and porters, monks and merchants, rebels and clerks, farmers and soldiers, sleepless parents and students staring bravely at unread pages. It has been banned, praised, smuggled, rationed, branded, brewed badly, brewed beautifully, and loved beyond reason. The last sip is cooler. It leaves a trace of warmth and roast behind. The cup settles back into the saucer with a soft sound. Nothing dramatic happens. No empire rises. No manifesto is written. No goat begins dancing on a hillside. Mercifully. Yet something gentle remains the sense that a small daily act can hold an immense human story. So you let the room grow quieter. The cup is almost empty now, and the night gathers softly around its rim. Steam fades into air. The dark surface lowers. Outside, the world continues without needing your attention for a little while. Fields sleep under stars. Ports rest beneath ropes and salt. Old streets cool after rain. Somewhere, a farmer dreams of weather. Somewhere, a tired worker sets a pot for morning. Somewhere, a café chair is lifted onto a table, and the last light goes out. You breathe slowly. The history of coffee does not end in noise. It settles, like grounds at the bottom of a cup, bitter, fragrant, warm, and human. You can leave it there now. Let the taste soften. Let the stories loosen. Let the long road from red cherry to dark drink drift away into the quiet. The cup is still. The room is warm, and you can sleep